Hello everybody. I just thought that I would go ahead and do a live stream today just to catch up on stuff, basically. I never announce these live streams, and I know I would probably be better off if I'd go through that process, but then I'd actually have to schedule a specific time to do it, and thought I'd maybe give it a couple minutes though, just before I really start getting into anything, just to see who's online right now. Normally I do these at night, so hey, the Rev's immediately watching my stream. I think that's a good sign. How's it going, Reverend 20 Piece? Oh, by the way, I think the reason why I have problems posting comments on YouTube, I actually think it's probably on my end, because I can do that on my phone, I can do it on other devices, but not on my main laptop that I normally watch videos on. So I think it must have something to do with my browser settings, or maybe, maybe YouTube is sort of marking what I put as spam. But I've just noticed that, like, sometimes when I'm on other websites, it'll make me do the CAPTCHA thing over and over again. So I almost think it's something that I have as a browser setting, or maybe I don't know, because you would think that it wouldn't do it on the same account with a different device, that if it was really just about YouTube censorship in itself, that they wouldn't let me comment on that either. So Rev says, going good, just getting out of the shower and shaving. Lazy day. Yep, well, it's a Sunday. I figured it might be a decent time to do a stream. Like I say, I would probably be better off if I'd actually announce before I'm doing a stream, at least maybe an hour or two beforehand. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and start kind of talking about things that have been on my mind that I wanted to get into. The first thing, and I've made many videos about the coronavirus stuff. Some people are probably getting sick of me talking about this, but there's something specific that I wanted to bring up that the only other person I've seen mention this is Red Pill Germany was talking about this in a recent video, and I had it came into mind before I heard his video, but it's very similar to what he said, which is that the way things stand now, there's really no pretense of actually doing things for the betterment of the public. Like, it's not about protecting you from the virus anymore. And I want to get into why I think that's clearly the case now. Pretty much everyone has had the opportunity, if they've wanted to get the vaccine in the United States and other first world countries. If you want to have the vaccination, you've had the opportunity to sign up and do that, unless you're a kid, unless you're below a certain age. And really, there's no reason that people can't choose to get the vaccine if they are afraid of this virus, right? I'm not suggesting that's what people should do, but the opportunity to do that is available. So much of what has been used to justify all these policies from the beginning of this virus has been, you need to protect other people. right? That's really the argument primarily that's been used. Of course, first to start off with, it was the whole flatten the curve argument, and then that turned into the, we need to protect everybody kind of argument. But the issue now is that because everybody has the opportunity to get the vaccine, virtually everyone is equipped with the ability to protect themselves from this virus. And the change in the sort of propaganda, really, that's really what it is. It's gone from, well, you need to protect other people, to we're just going to punish you for not choosing to get the vaccine, right? That's basically all it is now. It doesn't make sense on the basis of, well, other people don't have the ability to protect themselves because we don't have a cure for the virus, so you need to wear the mask and you need to stay at home, and we're all in this together. None of that applies anymore because everybody pretty much has had the opportunity, if they've wanted to get supposedly protected from this. And so this is something that maybe other people aren't recognizing. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm slow and I'm one of the last to recognize it. But there's a difference between disagreeing with someone, even disagreeing with someone based on strong evidence or facts, and the internal logic of someone's argument not making sense, right? Someone can say, well, I think that the masks protect people, and I think that we have no other solution for, before the vaccine was available, we had no other solution for dealing with this coronavirus. And I think that this is a big deal, right? I think that it is this horrible pandemic as it's portrayed in the mainstream media and by the government at different levels. So, I think that people should look out for one another, and because you can't really protect yourself so well from this virus, you need to protect other people. Again, I don't really agree with that, but at least you could be consistent and say, this is what I think is happening, and the response to actually deal with the situation is we're going to do what we can to supposedly protect one another, right? But now that doesn't even make sense. The internal logic has been destroyed in that argument because there is no reason to protect people. And so it goes beyond just being unreasonable or not being consistent with what these policies have done, right? Before, you could argue, as I did, that there was really no evidence that the masks helped. The numbers weren't any really lower when everybody was wearing a mask. And of course, the response then was to just blame the 10% or less of people that weren't wearing a mask everywhere that they went in public. The vast majority of people clearly were. But, even if you were having a different interpretation of the evidence, you could at least say, well, I disagree with that interpretation, but I respect that you're trying to, you care about other people and you're trying to do the right thing and whatnot. But, I don't believe that the pandemic is nearly as bad as what people are saying, or, I don't believe that the masks are effective, or these policies are just hurting the economy. At least you could have an argument about it. Now it makes absolutely no sense, right? People can protect themselves. So why do you have policies that try to, and here's the key to what I'm trying to say, why do you have policies that say, if you go to this public event and you haven't been vaccinated, you should wear a mask? Why? Who am I protecting now, other than myself? Who am I not protecting, other than myself? And that's kind of the disturbing part, not just of this recent development in this case, but of the whole issue of the response to the coronavirus, is that there's been so little dialogue and discussion, except from people who are aware of these issues, like except for people on YouTube and a few other places that are skeptical of all these policies. There's been very little discussion about, well, why can't we just let people decide as individuals, right? Why is it that we have to protect people from their own choices? Why does that make sense? It's kind of a libertarian-esque type of argument, but it's also a common sense argument in this case. It's like, why do we need to make people wear a mask so that they can be protected from their own choice not to get this vaccine. Even if you think the vaccine's the way to go, everybody needs to get vaccinated. Who does it hurt that person is not getting vaccinated? The only person that it could hurt is themselves, because other people have the opportunity to make the choice of getting vaccinated for themselves as well. And that's the issue with this, is that all it is punishing people that don't do what our leaders and what the media is telling people to do. It's purely a punishment, a punitive measure. That's all it is now. So, I've been thinking about that, where it's at a point now where normally I don't suggest arguing with people over this kind of stuff. I don't suggest, challenging people based on the evidence. Like I say, an example of that would be, well, where's the evidence that wearing a mask actually helps? Or, toward the beginning of this whole issue, of this whole crisis, if you want to call it that, people were saying, well, the whole idea of reaching a point where there's herd immunity is absurd. And that's, we can't do that because people will die. And it's like, well, we're going to reach herd immunity one way or the other, right? Without the vaccine, being almost a year away, a year out from having the vaccine developed, as it turned out to be, we didn't know how long it was going to take. A lot of people were just satisfied with basically shutting the economy down until, things got better, but things would never get better. Like, as soon as people tried to go back to normal without a vaccine, without some sort of cure in mind, people basically just were going to get the virus eventually. Like, it was going to continue to spread. It was just a matter of what rate it spread at. And so you could have that sort of argument back and forth, but I would say don't even mess with people that are just, regurgitating what they heard from the government and mainstream media, right? Normally anymore, I used to like to argue with people over these things, but I've kind of finally learned my lesson that if someone's not, and this is a different topic really, to be honest, but if someone's not thinking for themselves, don't try to discuss the evidence, don't try to discuss the overall sort of impression of what's going on, because it doesn't make sense. Like, they're not thinking for themselves, and they're not going to listen to what you have to say anyhow, right? As long as they can believe their own narrative, no matter how counter reality it might be, at least, in their mind it makes sense. So you can't prove that they're wrong. Like, the same thing was true with blaming the people that don't wear the masks. You can say, well, I go to Walmart or any other store and 90% of people are complying, and the people that aren't complying can't even get in to a lot of places. So how are people not following the rules? How is this not being enforced? And yet people would say, oh, it's because this person won't wear a mask that the virus is such a problem. If you want it to go away, everyone just needs to wear a mask. People can believe in those kinds of things if they want to, unfortunately. And there's no reason to argue when people can't look around and do their own assessment, and they're clearly just repeating what they've heard on CNN. Reverend 20 Piece says, mask up, homie, it's for the common good. I don't think so. I will if I have to in certain places, like medical facilities and whatever. I know you're just messing with me anyway. He also says almost no one is wearing masks anywhere in Arkansas, maybe 10% at the most. Yeah, and again, if someone really thinks, it really makes no sense, and that's what I'm going to go into here. If someone really thinks that this virus is so risky for them, then why not get the vaccine? Like, I mean, if they believe all of the hoopla, all the silliness really around this, then why is it that they don't just get the vaccine and then you're not vulnerable to it? I guess they think that, oh, I'm not going to spread it to other people now, or, oh, maybe I can get the flu. Like, I don't know. People are just not making sense when it comes to this. They're not, like I say, really thinking about what they're doing and not thinking for themselves, which is not unusual. We see that a lot today. But my issue that I'm wanting to get into is well, I've basically already mentioned it, that why is it that people who essentially think that what they're being told from the media is true and valid, how is it that it makes sense now when there's nobody left to protect, right? There's nobody left to protect because everybody has access to this vaccine virtually. So the only person you're not protecting is yourself, and that's nobody else's business. Unless you're going to take care of me when I get sick, that's nobody else's business. And so it's just a matter of, again, trying to control people. That's the only thing that's left, trying to punish people for not doing what the state wants. And so with this type of thing, it is so difficult for people to try to make sense of it that I think in this case you can actually argue with people. You can just say, well, who's left to protect? Why do you insist that people who haven't been vaccinated wear a mask when there's no other people left to protect anymore? You've gotten the vaccine. This other person has the vaccine. All these people that are concerned about the virus have gotten the vaccines. So who am I supposed to protect now? And then I honestly think that if you mention that, the opposing argument, the propaganda argument that people are being indoctrinated with, it just immediately falls apart in this case. What are they going to say? They're just going to say something idiotic, or they're going to have to acknowledge that you're right. And so there may be, and maybe I'm being too optimistic here, which is unusual for me, maybe there's a chance to get some more people to wake up with this. Because the argument now is so absurd that you have to protect people that can choose to get the vaccine, that can choose to be immunized, that can choose to have the immunization. I can't say that word, I guess. These people have the option to protect themselves from this. And, the media, the thing about it is I think that the elites have really overplayed their hand. I think that they weren't considering what the next step was because they just played their last card with this coronavirus stuff, right? If you're going to make the claim that this vaccine is so effective and the vaccine's the answer to everything and we can go back to normal after everyone gets the vaccine, or 75% or however many people get vaccinated in the population, if you're going to make that claim, you can't really turn around and say, well, but these people that haven't been vaccinated, they're still a problem. I mean, why? Who are they a problem for? If we've met the criteria for what supposedly is going to resolve the situation, then what argument do you have left? And it's just so easy to show that, it's rare that I would recommend arguing with people anymore, but it's just, who am I protecting? It's as simple as that. You have the ability to get the vaccine. Why shouldn't I be allowed to not get the vaccine and do the same things you do? Why should I be discriminated against and forced to wear a mask still when there's no one to wear a mask for? And this whole time we've been told we're doing it to protect other people. There's no other people to protect anymore, right? Everybody that wants to get this vaccine can. If they don't do it, that's on them, right? And the unspoken sort of flip side to this is if someone, myself included, I choose not to get the vaccine because I don't think that I'm susceptible to the coronavirus causing severe symptoms for me. If I do get the virus and I get really sick or die, you know whose responsibility that is? You know who's accountable for that? Me, myself. And that's the way it is. Again, if our leaders were being honest about the whole situation, what they would say is, it's a risk either way. You have to do your own assessment and actually think as an individual, and you have to decide, okay, this coronavirus could be bad if I have these underlying conditions, or if I'm of a certain age, if I'm older, or, I think that, my immune system is shot, so I think that this could kill me. So I'm going to go ahead and get the vaccine versus, you know what, I'm not at risk for this. I'm young. I'm healthy. Yes, there is a really almost infinitesimally small percentage of younger people that get this virus and die from it or have long-term effects from it. But at the same time, we don't know what the long-term effects of the vaccine are. We can't. There's no way that anybody knows, because we just basically rushed this vaccine and put it out there, or the various versions of the vaccine, and we have no clue about what the long-term effects of that are going to be. So, it's a joke, because you see these kinds of, experts talk about how the vaccine's completely safe. And then the next story, I've literally seen this, where the next story is, oh, this vaccine has been recalled because pregnant women had this sort of result from it, or it could cause this heart problem. I've seen various things where it's like, we don't know what the long-term effects of this vaccine are going to be, and you don't know what the long-term effects of having the virus could be. It could do damage to some people's systems and they not know it for a period of time. Those things are bad, but people have to do, or should be expected to do, their own risk assessment, right? But that's not how it's presented. It's just vaccine good, not getting the vaccine bad, because we want to control you. That's the only logic behind it. We want to control you, and we want to make people do what we feel like everyone should do, or, to control people. You could argue about why that control is there, but it's clear to me that that's really the issue, that's really the goal. So those were my thoughts on this, guys, is that we've shifted from an argument that doesn't really make sense based on evidence, but that is at least internally consistent with the idea of supposedly protecting other people, to an argument that is so irrational that it contradicts itself, right? Oh, you need to wear a mask still if you haven't gotten this vaccine. Why? Oh, to protect people. Who am I protecting? There is no one left that we have to protect, because it doesn't make sense anymore. Other people have the opportunity to protect themselves, so why isn't it my business whether I choose to get the vaccine to supposedly protect myself? Well, it isn't anybody else's business. It's just a way to try to force people to do what the elites, what the state, what the media wants you to do. That's the only thing that's left. And it's just clear now that, to me at least, it's clear that pretty much what I thought this was about for a long time now, that it was about control and not actually protecting people or wanting what's best for society, it's clear now that, this has pretty much been confirmed. And that's what RPG, Red Pill Germany, was basically saying, that it's just like, it's clear that it's just about power and control now, because there is no rationale for protecting anyone anymore other than yourself. And if it's about yourself, my body, my choice, right? Leftists love that until it doesn't go along with their political agenda. So that's kind of the recent revelation, if you want to call it that. It isn't really. Other people have probably figured this out long before I did, but it's like the whole idea of protecting other people is gone now, and yet we still want to try to force people to get the shot. Makes no sense, except from the standpoint of forcing other people to do what you want them to do, which is bad. And I'm not hopeful that people will figure this out or even discuss the whole individual choice aspect of this, because the propaganda is so strong that if you don't just get the vaccine, you're a bad person, basically. It's clearly not about encouraging a good result for society. It's just about forcing people to do what you want them to do. And it's become so clear that you can just literally say, who am I protecting? Yourself? Oh, well, myself. Well, I choose not to do that. Why should you get to force me to protect myself? That's retarded. That's the internal consistency of that argument is gone now, and it's just so easy to point this out, I think. The Rev says I'm still somewhat surprised that the Army hasn't made the shots mandatory. but since it's not fully FDA approved, they can't. Yeah, and maybe they'll go through sort of the process that vaccines are supposed to go through, and then it'll be fully approved. It's kind of crazy that, I mean, it's just so contradicting. Like, the agency that's supposed to decide whether something is safe or not has not decided that the coronavirus vaccines are safe, and yet somehow all the so-called experts say that it's safe at the same time when the agency that's supposed to make that decision hasn't done so. I mean, it's clearly BS, but whatever, you know. I imagine it will be approved fairly soon. I don't know. It depends on how much of the actual process that it's supposed to go through that they're actually using. I don't really know where that stands, to be honest. But, you know, I mean, I'm not, like I say, I'm not so much against it that I'm telling people, well, you're old, you shouldn't get it anyway. You know, it doesn't matter if you're actually at risk from the virus, you know, don't get the vaccine. I'm not going to say that at all. I think it's an individual call. And yet all the propaganda says that it's not supposed to be an individual call based on ideas and arguments that make no sense on their face. It's just, it's clown world, I guess. So, to kind of stop talking about Corona for a while, I'll probably get back into it, knowing me. There's a second thing that I wanted to discuss, and this is something that is a little bit more I'm putting out there as a question or as an incomplete idea. Although I'm sure a lot of you guys that watch this will have their own sort of idea. But what is it that actually would represent equality between men and women, right? I know this is a strong shift from what I've been talking about, but, you know, in this live stream so far. But, you know, there's all this talk about true equality and fake equality, and feminism's not about equality, but egalitarianism is about equality, and, oh, we can have equality under the law, and, you know, that's not the same as equal outcomes. You have this whole discussion that, you know, we've all probably heard elements of for a long time, and it doesn't have to even be related to men and women. Like, you could talk about the various supposed forms of equality ad nauseum, but specifically between men and women, has there ever, and I've been thinking about this, like I say, this is more of a thought experiment or just kind of going through the process with my viewers, has there ever really been anything like equality between men and women? I think the answer to that is probably no, but to get a little bit deeper into that, I think, what would it even look like? What would it, if we could say, all right, we're going to make men and women equal, what would that even entail? Right? Because this is a silly analogy, but this is the analogy that I've been thinking about for a while. If any of you guys have ever played a pretty open-ended, or maybe not open-ended, but very sort of, you can choose to play a variety of different characters in an RPG, right? You can play a character that starts in one area of the world in the game and has all these particular traits. Let's say he's, you know, this person's strong, this character is very good with, you know, the martial abilities, but they're dumb, or they don't have any sort of extra boosts or extra abilities that they have aside from just being strong. Or you can start in a completely different area of the world with a completely different sort of script to start off with, at least, and totally different character traits. And then you're going to take them and put them together and put them in the same situation and say, we're going to make them equal. Well, that's not the way it works. That's not the point. You have different traits, you have different paths toward victory or different paths toward success in the game, depending on your traits and what your starting point is. I think that actually is just where things pretty much stand between men and women today. I know that's I'm kind of the master of ridiculous analogies sometimes. In the sense that I come up with crazy stuff like that may or may not be apt toward describing the actual situation. But that's the way I'm thinking about it, is that, a lot of the stuff that we see about so-called equality is just like, what does that even look like in reality? Not we're going to say men and women are equal, and then we're going to give women all this special attention and not hold women to a particular standard, right? That's what we have now, the feminist equality, which is not about equality at all. It's about controlling men by saying women deserve what the top 10% of men have, but then ignoring all these blatantly clear issues that men have, like with suicide and family law courts and domestic violence laws and all that, right? It's equality of convenience. But what would actual equality between men and women look like? Do you guys think, and the question that I'm deriving from this is, do you guys even think that equality between men and women is ever possible? Do you think that can ever really happen in a general sense? Because the more that I think about it, several years ago, after I became aware of where things really stand between men and women and the differences between male and female nature, several years ago, when I had first started learning about that kind of thing, I probably would have said, well, maybe equality is possible, right? It's just not feminism, or it's just not traditionalism, or it's just not, anything that we have going on here. But the more that I look at it and the more I consider it, I think it's just impossible. I think it's like trying to take two characters that have totally different traits, have totally different paths to success, and saying, well, we're going to make these two entities equal. How? Right? And maybe, they share some things in common, right? Maybe certain aspects of their sort of script or their sort of game world are going to be similar, but a lot of it's just going to be different. And one of the reasons why I think that it's impossible is women are just always going to have preferential treatment in a lot of cases, right? Because men frankly desire women, and because women themselves have own group preference, and this has been shown, and I'm actually being too technical probably in even describing this, right? It's like, very rarely are women actually expected to meet the male standard. And I think that's been true in every form of society that we've had, pretty much, that I can think of. In traditionalism, women aren't expected to meet the male standard, but men have more authority. In a feminist society or a gynocentric society, women have the authority and they're still not really expected to meet the male standard. What do I mean by the male standard? Well, if you take a certain action, you get certain consequences, right? If you're not able to get the job done, you get fired, right? Something like that. Like, for women, they get preferential treatment. They get more opportunities. A lot of women, I've watched videos recently where they're not meeting the standards in terms of fitness for the armed forces, right? For the military, for the Army, I think it was, which I guess the Rev's watching this video, he's probably seen some clips of that where it's like almost half of women aren't meeting the fitness standards, but it doesn't really matter. Like, what are the consequences going to be for them, right? And maybe the Rev can mention whether there's consequences for not meeting that standard, but it doesn't matter. All you get are these articles that say we need to make things equal by making things easier for women. Well, that's not equality. The Rev says, I haven't been reading my comments too much here, I'm going to hold out as long as I can. Might cost me my job, we'll see. Yeah, I mean, at some point, I don't know, man. At some point, it's like when the personal cost becomes too high, that has to be factored into the kind of risk assessment almost. It's like, well, the risk assessment is we don't know what's going to happen with the vaccines in the long run. We don't know what the actual effects are going to be because this thing was rushed through so much, and because there's so much propaganda swirling around it that you can't get at the truth. That's another part of this, I think. But then as time goes along, you can kind of see whether people are dropping over from having the vaccine, or you could kind of try to do your own analysis over time. And then at the same time, the negative effects for not getting the vaccine are there. So I don't recommend that anybody gets it unless they think they're really susceptible to this virus. But the state and the people that basically are behind all this stuff, in my opinion, they're going to make it more and more and more costly to not get the vaccine. That's the thing that I think is coming, and that's not some great revelation on my part to say that, but I think that's it. They're going to make it as hard as possible to not get the vaccine, probably. Or maybe this just goes away. Maybe after enough people get it, the government can't make the case anymore, and enough people see that it's BS that it kind of goes away. But I'm not too hopeful about that. I think that that our leaders are going to milk this situation for as long as they can, even though they've kind of cut off the tap already, because they've said this vaccine is going to cure everything. So again, like I've said the whole time, like I said in this video, what reason do you have left? What rationale is left for making people get the vaccine if people can protect themselves now? But yeah, I mean, they're going to make it as costly as possible to not get it. And most people, the vast majority of people, I think a lot of the people that say they're not going to get the vaccine are going to end up getting it sooner or later. Some by choice and some not so much. But we'll see how it plays out. But it's all, like I say, it's just an effort to control people, which I think is obvious to the people that are actually paying attention to what's going on. But the Rev also says, I don't think it's realistically possible for men and women to actually be established as equals. Yeah, it's a fantasy or an illusion. There are no real consequences for women in the Army at the moment. If we get into a real war, people will see it'll be too late, though. Yeah. I mean, it's just probably going to be pretend that the issue doesn't exist and find a reason for women not to be on the front lines. I mean, that's probably the most likely thing that would happen, right? It's just we don't pay attention to what's going on here. We just put these women in these desk jobs and have the men go out because that's kind of inevitable. Nomad John says, I was a nomad before this, and it seems like that's not really going to be possible anymore. Is it because of the vaccine restrictions, or the situation with the virus and how much control that's established? Because that could be the case, depending on where you're going and what they make you do. I think that going from state to state may not be undoable if you're in the States, but in other countries, going from country to country, it might be extremely difficult to just kind of not comply to the restrictions and stuff. Nomad John says yes. Yeah, I don't know. I'm planning to actually go to a different state here within a week and a half or so. And I kind of read up on what they're doing, and I don't think there's going to be a problem there, but that's a lot different than going from one country to another. Good point about within the states, Nomad John says. Yeah, I mean, there are going to be some states like California and whatnot that are probably still going to be crazy, but says I don't even want to get the PCR test. Yeah, that's going to be the thing. They're going to make you go through all kinds of hoops. And then if you're willing to do it, they'll probably let you, but you're probably going to have to do that over and over again if you're traveling from one country to the next, I would imagine. Which is pretty much not acceptable within reason, I guess, unless you want to go through all that a dozen times. So just to kind of wrap up my second point that I wanted to kind of get at, like as a question, again, what would men and women being equal even look like? And is that even possible? Even in theory, you could say, well, men and women will be treated equally human. Well, that's all nice, but, then who actually is going to meet that standard of, well, you have human rights, but who has to fight for those rights? It just goes back to the same sort of paradigm. Like, when all is said and done, women are not really treated as equally human. They're treated as human beings while men are human doings. Is there any way around that part of it either? I doubt it. So, I don't know what it would look like, and I don't think it's even possible. I don't think it's reasonable to even ask, or even try to, not ask, but get to a point where men and women are supposedly equal. I mean, you would almost have to throw away sexual dimorphism by doing some sort of genetic process, going through some sort of process to make men and women the same. And why would you do that? Why would, that wouldn't, I guess it would resolve problems between men and women, but it wouldn't work, right? If in a sexually reproducing species, that's impossible. And we are the way we are for a reason. Men and women are different for a reason. And one thing that I think is kind of important that some people don't necessarily understand. Sorry, I got kind of distracted, which is not unusual. Whether you believe in a creator or whether you believe in evolution hardcore and you're an atheist and you think everything came from, a protein and amino acid mix of some sort and everything evolved from that, strictly speaking, anything in between either. Whether you think we developed or we were created the way that we are or to be a certain way or we just evolved over time, develop, I think, is the kind of word in between those two things, in between created and evolved. But it doesn't matter. We are the way we are for a reason in terms of men and women, right? We were either created this way because that's how it's supposed to be, or we evolved this way because that's what was advantageous and that's what's worked for our species. It really doesn't make any difference. Sometimes people get distracted by sort of different belief systems, but in this case, we are the way we are for a reason. And men and women are just not the same. And I don't know that there's any way to really make those, apples and oranges equal. It just doesn't work, right? You can kind of well, the orange is heavier than the apple, so we'll cut part of it off so that they're equal weight. Now they're equal. No, they're not. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I feel like we're doing. And really, we're not even trying to do that. We just, like I say, feminism has not been about equality. We just live in a society that's female-centric, right? We live in a society that's equality of convenience based on what the top 10% of men have. There's no standard, and this is a different topic, so I'm not going to get into this much, but there's no standard that you can hold women to. It's special but equal, yet victim. That's clearly not true equality. So you can have equity, right? Maybe that's really the thing we should talk about. Like, men and women can benefit from each other in a system that facilitates this, at least theoretically, right? I'm not talking about whether traditionalism is equitable or not for men. A lot of guys will say it is, and a lot of guys will say that it's not, because men still have all this responsibility, and that's a fair point. But even in theory, you could say, well, women want this and men want that. So, men and women both want to have families in a lot of cases, but you actually have to balance responsibility with authority, for example. You have to give everyone a positive incentive and an ability to have a positive outcome. Right? I would argue that's what the marriage contract, that's the reason why the marriage contract exists in the first place. Right? People don't need to be married to just be together in a relationship. The marriage contract existed so that men and women could raise children together and both have obligations, but also a reward for being in that situation, right? And this has just been the way that it's been up until recent times. Now marriage is just a joke. It's a contract with the state for one party, usually the woman, to screw over the other party, usually the man, anytime she wants to. That's what marriage is now. That's essentially all it does to men. Like, there's very little value there at all, in my opinion. But, what would equality or even equity, I think equity is at least imaginable. But equality is just nonsense. I mean, that's the conclusion that I'm reaching more and more, or that I'm moving further toward as I look at how things actually are in real life. Is it realistically, for example, egalitarians will say, well, we just need to make women meet the male standards. We just need to treat women the same as men. That's all fine and dandy. I mean, in theory, again, that kind of makes sense, but has that ever been the case? Is there any evidence that in practice that's even possible? I don't see any evidence from history or from present times either, for sure, that that's even possible. So what is it that equality even looks like? I can't, the more that I consider it, the more I think that that's not possible, and that the whole thing is just basically a distraction, or basically, an attempt to kind of justify equality in theory, but in reality, women having the advantage. I think that ultimately, when you try to make men and women equal, women are going to have the advantage because of all the intangibles, all the things that aren't set in stone, all of the things that, men are willing to do for women, but women have no sort of inclination to do for men. It's just, the situation is so much different depending on many factors, of course. And yeah, there's variance among, individuals. Not all women are the same. Not all men are the same. But there are so many general differences between men and women that it's just like trying to jam a square through a circle. You can't do it. And I honestly think that, I guess the reason why I'm motivated to talk about that is because there's just not going to be an outcome that's positive from that. I think you have to move to, again, and if we have a system that works again someday between men and women, right? If there's a social contract again in a new society, basically, between men and women, it's not going to be based on equality. It's going to be based on equity. It's going to be based on value that both parties get that's different because men and women are different. So, for people that watch this later, what do you guys think? Do you think equality between men and women is actually possible in practice? Or do you know of an example where it existed in the past in some form? I really don't. Maybe that's me not having enough knowledge of history, but I don't see it. The attempt to establish equality between men and women has always resulted in a gynocentric society, in a society that just wants to cater to women, and where women have most of the control in the interactions between the genders. And I just don't think it's possible. I don't think that it actually works in practice. I think there are zero examples of this, and that equality really can't be the goal if you want a society that's going to be sustainable and actually healthy, and actually give men an incentive to participate in that in relationships. MGTOW Cowboy says, I think feminism was created to destabilize society. They know it's a lie, but it can be used to weaken men. That's true. From the standpoint of what sort of the goal was from our leaders. The interesting thing about feminism, just like a lot of other political theories, and again, this is probably not something that a lot of you guys haven't figured out already, is that there are different motivations for different parties, right? If you're a woman, you like feminism, probably, for, let's just say, a feminist woman, just for the sake of being specific. You like feminism because it gives you special privileges, right? You like feminism because it allows you to not be held to a standard. You can be equal to a man when you want that, but then you can not have to actually meet the male standard in many cases, and then you can say, I'm the victim, all at the same time, whatever, you know. And I'm going to make a video on this someday, I think. Probably one of my I'm going to try to script it well, where people talk about how there's a double standard with feminism. Oh, there's all these double standards. It's not really a double standard. It's a triple standard, if there is such a thing. And it's actually a whole spectrum of standards, because it's not just A or B. It's A, B, and C, and anything along the line in between. In other words, special. When I want a man to do this. I want a real man to help me take care of my kids that I had with 5 other dudes. You know, I want special treatment because men need to still compete for me, right? I still want men to show me what they have to offer. But then I'm equal to a man when I want a man's job, or I'm equal to a man when I want something that he has. I'm equal to a man when there's some sort of benefit for me for being equal. But then I'm also a victim when I say, you know, that a man has abused me. When I say that, you know, I deserve this child support. I deserve, you know, he's abusive, so you need to file a domestic, really a restraining order against him without due process through the courts, through the family law courts in this case, so that, you know, he can be punished because I'm a victim and I say that he's bad and he hurt me. Special but equal, yet victim, right? That's not a standard that you could hold women by. That's a whole spectrum of standards. So I think it's understated, really, when people say that, well, the feminism has these double standards. No, it's a whole line of standards where women can just do whatever they want and try to justify it if they're clever enough using feminist ideology, using the culture that's been created through feminism and female-centric thinking. You know, that's the issue with that in terms of the advantages that women have in our society today, but yet you can just claim that, oh, we just want equality when it's convenient, when it works, when we want to have something that the top tier men have. The Rev says, I don't have any issue with men and women being different. It's the natural way of things. Being lied to by the media and society is my beef. Yep. And just the overall situation that's been created after all this indoctrination. But let's be honest. A lot of women, you know, they know what they're doing in some cases, and they just know they can get away with it too. They know that they're not going to be held to the same standard of cause and effect, of consequence for making a choice that men are. And so, you know, the overall situation, the overall sort of environment that's created is also pretty annoying. Like, you know, some women are being lied to and they're just dumb about, you know, being able to do anything a man can do and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of it also is just, it's frustrating to have to deal with because you have to try to make an effort to almost avoid women, right? You have to recognize from that red pill perspective what the situation is between men and women and react accordingly, right? It would be better if it would be better for everyone, really, if men and women were just told the truth and then we could actually interact with one another in a positive way. I think that's possible, but I don't think that's really possible on the basis of so-called equality. That probably went in a different direction than what the Rev was intending to say, I'm sure, because I'm good at doing that. But Red Pill Addict 36 says, the ways of a woman we may never have an understanding. I think we have a pretty good understanding of female nature, really, when it comes to a lot of stuff. Women, the biggest problem guys have with, and I'm not an expert with women, I'm not trying to say that, I know game and stuff like that, I don't, but the biggest problem that men have with understanding women's ways is that men try to understand women from a male perspective. And what I mean by that, it might sound like gobbledygook, but what I mean by that is men assume that women are rational. Men assume that women can be understood the way that men are understood, right? That men do things based on reason, so there must be some sort of reasonable explanation, some sort of rationale for why women do what they do. Well, there kind of is, but not on an everyday basis. Like, women do what they do based on their feelings. When a woman's feelings, and this is what TFM, Turd Flinging Monkey, has said, I've not heard anybody else describe it in a better way. For a woman, her feelings are reality. Once you understand that, women are not really difficult to analyze, right? Women do things based on feelings and emotion over objective truth and reality in a lot of cases. Some women can overcome this, but they're not encouraged to, and so the vast majority of them don't. You can also look at things like solipsism, hypergamy, Briefolt's law. Through those kinds of concepts, we can understand women fairly well, right? The whole thing to me about not understanding women is that that's convenient for them, because then you don't find out, you don't discover the negative aspects of female nature that can exist. MGTOW Cowboy says, so basically men have to realize they are dealing with a false system that puts them at a disadvantage, so act according. That's right, yep. That's a big part of it. The Rev says, we have to remember it's not only men who have been lied to, women have also been lied to. A royal shit show. Yep, it is. In the long run, and I've talked about this before, and so have a lot of other guys, I'm sure. In the long run, women are worse off because of feminism, and worse off because of a society that just doesn't encourage good relationship outcomes with men, even male friends and stuff. It's like, because there is no real incentive for men to participate, other than the men that really don't respect themselves, or they're not aware enough to figure out what we call red pill knowledge. That's why women ask, where have all the good men gone? Well, it's because of the situation, the environment that you have endorsed through feminism, whether you realize it or not. So yeah, a lot of your average women out there that just go along with the flow, they don't really know why they're being lied to or what's going on in the big picture. But they think they can take advantage of the overall environment, and they can in the short run, but in the long run, they end up with, their cats, in some cases at least, right? They end up kind of miserable, and studies have shown that women are more and more, the whole idea of, well, you can have it all, so go out there and have a career, and go out there and do all the stuff men do, and, ride the cock carousel and all that does damage to them. That gives them a negative outcome compared to if they weren't being told those things. So yeah, in that sense, men and women are both being lied to. They're both being, led in a way that allows the state to manipulate the results, the outcome, but it's not good for men or women, really. Red Pill Addict 36 says, I think men should never make a woman a priority. Agreed. He also says a woman goes with whoever wins the war. Yeah, there have been a lot of sort of historical overviews. I don't know what you call them, studies of some sort that have looked at that, where women will go off with whoever wins a war. And of course, that it only makes sense because otherwise you're not going to reproduce. So the women that are willing to do that and compromise and go off with whatever men are basically like the alpha males of the society, then, that's what women are geared to do because that's what's worked for them in the past, and again, you can say, well, I don't believe in evolution. All right. But that's still what women have done. Like, the evidence is still there. So in that case, women have been created or have developed to basically be able to do that, to be able to move from, well, my guy's dead because of this conqueror, but that's okay because these other guys are here too and I can reproduce with them. I mean, that's the outcome either way. So let's see. MGTOW Cowboy also says, trust and believe women know exactly what they are doing. Yeah, a lot of them do, but some of them, like I say, women just have own group preference. Some of it is built into their biology. And so a lot of them just, again, some of them know what they're doing. I think some of them just don't care. Like, they don't care about the truth. They don't want to find out what the overall situation is. They just go with their feelings, and sometimes it's just that simple. Men are held to accountability, Red Pill Addict says. Women accountability doesn't exist. Right. Even though at the same time we're being told that we have an equal society where we need to do more for women to make things equal. It's like, has there ever been a healthier basis for equality that actually exemplifies supposedly true equality between men and women, or anything in the ballpark? Or what theoretically would that even look like? That's kind of the point that I was wanting to get to, or trying to. That's the question I was trying to ask with a lot of what I've been saying here. I don't know what it looks like. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's helpful, right? I don't think when you try to make men into women or women into men and make them equal, that there's really anybody's going to be satisfied with that. So, even from like an egalitarian perspective, I get, wanting to say that there should be equality under the law in general. You can make the case for that and still know that men and women aren't going to be equal when it comes to a lot of the stuff they do, but we treat everyone like a human being, basically. Everyone's equally human. Okay, that's fine, but that's not enough to describe what things would actually look like by far if men and women were equal. What would it look like? I don't think that it's possible. I don't see what that would look like from, the perspective of someone that's really aware that what we have now is not equality, it's control of men by women through society, through the state, through the culture as well. I mean, what would it even look like to have equality between men and women? It's never been done, and I'm not sure that it can ever be done. I don't think that's even the answer. But, who am I guess, to say that? Like, there are so many people, even people that are generally, like a lot of the MRAs, for example, will consider themselves egalitarians. And I'm, like I say, I'm not really against that in theory, but what does that look like? What does it look like? Because women are always going to have these intangible benefits. They're always going to have the stuff that, you can't make it equal. Like, you can't say, hey, stop wanting to have sex with this woman. Stop finding her attractive and hold her to the male standard. For the men that are disciplined enough, you can do that. But men in general and society in general will never do that. It'll never say, really, you go off and we don't care about you. Just like we're requiring men to find a way to be self-sustaining, to try to find a way to overcome, problems and whatnot. We're not going to help you any more than we help these men. Will society collectively ever say that? I don't think so. There's just, thing that men have, this biological drive to not only have sex with women, but to protect a lot of women because they're the ones that have the babies, right? You're never going to get rid of that. And so in any society where you start off, I think, trying to establish equality, you're not going to get equality anyway. So how do you create this equality between men and women? I'm the more that I consider it, the less that I see that it can actually be possible, in my opinion. Big Towel Cowboy also says women are completely self-centered. This is proven science. Kohlberg, 6 Stages of Moral Development. Yeah, I remember TFM doing a video series back in the day about that, where women stop at like the 3rd stage or something like that. And you know, the problem is you're just going to have deniers. You're going to have people that say, well, men and women are the same and the differences are between individuals and all that. But what evidence shows that? Right? That's basically what I'm asking. What evidence can you actually come up with that says, oh, you know, men and women are close enough to being the same that you can actually make them equal? Based on what? Based on ideology. Based on nonsense, basically. Not based on evidence from history or evidence of societies that we see now where men and women are equal. It doesn't work. Like, what is it? Even in theory, what does it look like? Well, we're just going to assume men and women are the same. That's kind of what you have to do. But in reality, that will never work. Men and women aren't close enough to being the same for them to be made equal. And so it's useless. You know, I think it's useless to talk about actual equality between men and women other than, like I say, equally human. But even then, men aren't treated equally human to women in most cases because of the provider-protector role that men have always played. Reverend 20p says meow mixed futures. Yeah, that's a lot of that's what's happening, you know, and who knows what the future is going to look like for younger women now, but a lot of it's going to end up that way. A lot of women are going to end up, you know, in that situation. Red Pill Addict says when men fall down, there's nowhere for them to go, but if a woman falls down, there are tons of programs to help them live comfortably. Right. And that's all done while at the same time supposedly achieving equality, right? We need to do more for women for equality. Yeah, I mean, that just tells me that we're not really wired, both men and women are not wired to think that we're equal to one another. It's just there's too many differences and too many, like I say, intangible, or although if you're looking at programs and stuff like that, it's not really intangible. You can measure it. But there are too many differences between how men and women treat each other, or how, you know, people treat women versus how people treat men, I should say, from both genders, really. Like, you know, women are given preferential treatment when it comes to a lot of things. How do you make that equal, right? If you have equality under the law, theoretically that can work, but what do you give men to offset the advantage that women ultimately have when you supposedly try to achieve equality, right? Like feminism has. Oh, well, that's great. That's a great example of equality, except it's basically created a system where you have separate castes, right? Women are the higher caste and men are the lower caste. Women have control over men. That's equality. It's just not, I don't see how it's possible, right? And I'm not asking this just to get that answer. If someone thinks that men and women can be equal, what does that look like in reality? And is that consistent with our nature as men and as women, right? I mean, I think you have to, like I say, talk about value, having sort of a positive outcome for both men and women, and having value for both genders rather than equality. I just don't, it's just not going to, like, there's no evidence that that can actually work. The Rev says society naturally protects women. I'm not mad. It is what it is. Right. I mean, and even if you had more of a state of nature type of thing, a lot of men would still protect women. Like, it wouldn't change a whole lot other than there'd be more danger, immediate danger for everyone, but especially for men, because women would still have more protection. So Red Pill Addict says this is true, but what about the equality? Yeah. And the Rev agrees with him 100%. MGTOW Cowboy says Jordan Peterson put it very well. He says that to this day, we do not know how to integrate male and female hierarchies. Yeah, you know, generally I kind of have mixed views on Jordan Peterson. I see him as kind of just a conservative. I mean, he's kind of a traditional conservative in many ways. And so, as with that ideology in general, I agree with parts of it. I think parts of it have value. I think parts of it don't work. But the problem with Jordan Peterson is he tries to kind of make it out to where, and I can't say that's what he was doing here, and I'm not trying to criticize what you said, MGTOW Cowboy, because I don't disagree with it, of course, but this idea of, well, we need to integrate male and female. Do we really need to integrate male and female hierarchies? It's like, is that really the issue, or is it just that women have control over men? Right? I mean, I think Jordan Peterson tends to try to make things technical because he doesn't completely want to accept what's going on. Right? Just like, if I ever do response videos, I may try to do a video on where he called MGTOW weasels, because the interesting thing, I mean, that's been played over and over again and discussed extensively by so many different content creators, but I'd have to watch it again. But in the little sort of lecture that led up to that statement, I think he was describing like how there are positive and negative manifestations of female nature. And he was talking about, well, these guys, MGTOW, men going their own way, they look at all these negative aspects of female nature, but they deliberately ignore the positive aspects, the positive attributes of female nature. Something like that is what he said. And then he said, well, that's disingenuous, or that's, not honest. And it's the same thing as saying you're a weasel. The problem is that in theory that might make sense, but the positive attributes of female nature don't fucking exist in reality anymore because they're not facilitated. Only the negative aspects of female nature are facilitated. So the positive aspects are irrelevant. Truly, I mean, it's just like if women can be nurturing and women can, be, just kind of loving and the things that are kind of attributed to positive aspects of female nature in our society today, assuming these things are aspects of female nature, they're not encouraged. Instead, women are encouraged to act like fools. They're encouraged to treat men like shit. They're encouraged to not care about their own kids. They're encouraged to blame everybody else, but then talk about how they can do everything a man can do. Blame everybody else, for their own decisions, I mean. So the thing about like saying something like mixing together male, and this is somewhat speculation on my part. Like I say, I don't know the context for this, for Jordan Peterson saying this, but it sounds like something he would say. It's like, it's not really about hierarchies, is it? It's about control, right? It's not about trying to get women and men to work together. It's about the fact that women are dominant. Hierarchies be damned, right? I mean, it makes no difference to me. Like, I'm sure there are more details that go into that where he tries to rationalize why that matters, but does it? Right? Is it really a matter of, well, you have the alpha male and you have the alpha woman and, they need to get along? No, it's women have control over men. It really is kind of, in my opinion, that's really just what it boils down to. It doesn't matter what your hierarchy is when a woman of any station can just say, oh, he tried to fuck me in the office. Maybe she wouldn't literally go that far with it, but, that's a little overboard on my part probably to use that as the example, but he tried to grope me in the office, and there's no evidence to support it or deny it, so he gets fired. So much for your hierarchy. That's what's been established by Me Too. So I just feel like sometimes Jordan Peterson tries to get technical to come up with some sort of insight, but he ignores the sort of starting point that you have to have based on reality. I'm sure that he can describe female hierarchies well, but that doesn't matter when women just have outright control over the workplace in some cases, if it's of the right type of work environment, right? If there are enough women that work there, and Me Too has allowed them to just fire men, and the HR department allows it to go on as well, right? Not trying to pick on anybody, I'm not trying to say you're wrong, MGTOW Cowboy, for mentioning Jordan Peterson. That's not what I'm saying at all. And I agree with some of the stuff Peterson says, but like I say, I think sometimes he gets technical to try to kind of, and I get overly technical too at times, but I think he tries to make things more complicated than what they are so that he doesn't have to admit, oh, wait a second. Being a traditional conservative doesn't work when women have control of the system, does it? Oops. Right? He can't sort of deal with that, I don't think, within his system of beliefs probably. So, you talk about hierarchies and stuff or he may talk about that kind of stuff instead. I'm not that impressed with Jordan Peterson when he talks about that kind of stuff, to be honest. That's just me. Let's see. Trying to look at the comments that... Well, I can just read them all, I suppose. He says that Reverend 20p says that MGTOW Cowboy made a good point. He sees it in the Army every day. It's an interesting dynamic, maybe an experiment. Yeah. I kind of think we kind of know what the result of the experiment's going to be, though, eventually. Maybe not. Maybe we don't know what the outcome's going to be. But I think that does depend on sort of what happens in the world, whether, like you say, Rev, there's a war or something like that goes on that basically is going to make men be in charge again in some form, just in general. Red Pill Addict says, a female army, what a tragedy that would be. Well, that could be the way that it would go if there is no war. Things are going to continue to move in that direction of, gynocentric policies if we're not tested, right? If we're not forced to acknowledge the differences between men and women, then yeah. The Rev says, I like Jordan Peterson, but it kind of feels like he's worn out his welcome at this point, or maybe his message is stale. Yeah, I've kind of given my own sort of criticism here already, but I don't know how other traditional conservatives are reacting to Jordan Peterson. I will say that. Maybe he's more popular than ever in some ways. Maybe YouTube is kind of just sort of blacklisting him at this point to some extent. But, to me, if you're a traditional conservative, you probably still like his message. But if you're looking around at what's going on, right, and I'm not trying to pick on traditional conservatives, but, if you're red-pilled, let's just say it that way, when it comes to where things stand today for men, eventually you look around and it's like, yeah, like I just mentioned, you can talk about hierarchies and you can talk about, positive and negative attributes of men and women and sort of our nature and the good things and the bad things that can come out. But at the end of the day, if women have control over the system, what does it matter, right? You can lecture men and lecture women all day long, but unless you can actually establish some sort of system where harmony between men and women is at least possible, then what makes the difference, right? And of course, Jordan Peterson doesn't talk exclusively about men versus women sort of intergender issues. He talks about other stuff, I'm sure, but a lot of the stuff is just like, in my view, it's valid in some cases, but what's the practical application for it when this is the society we have, right? Like, no matter how hard you work, we have a society built on usury, as someone like Hammerhand has pointed out in many videos. Like, that's one of his main themes, and it's absolutely true. It's we have a society that's basically built on, well, if you're not aware of what's going on around you and you don't think, well, what's good for me, and you just have this sort of traditional conservative way of doing things, it's like, it's all well and good to say that you need to do more, but if you're not doing more for yourself, or you're not doing more for what your goals are, while acknowledging that society, if you're a guy especially, pretty much hates you, then, if you can't get to that point, if you can't see that society itself doesn't necessarily have your best interests in mind, then kind of what's the point, right? What's the point in a lot of the stuff that Jordan Peterson says? And again, I'm not trying to be too belligerent or too, critical, but what's the application for a lot of the stuff that he says? It's like, it's hard to get to second base with that when society is still kind of hostile toward men, no matter what his message is. And you can learn from what he says, but like I say, I think he tries too hard to be technical and too hard to be, just purely theoretical sometimes, when this is just the impression that I've got. Like I said, when, in reality, women control the system. In reality, if you don't want to be controlled by that, you kind of have to go your own way in some form or fashion, right? Whether you've heard of MGTOW or you stick strictly to the MGTOW tenets or not. I think sometimes it's just the environment doesn't allow you to fully take advantage of some of the stuff that he says, in my opinion. And that's the case with a lot of stuff. Like I say, I'm not trying to pick on Peterson, but Red Pill Addict says, I work in a field women quit before they get started all the time. Well, that's probably good. Although probably involves a lot of physically intense stuff. So if you like that job, and if women are going to stay away from it, steer clear from it for the most part, that's a good thing. Oh, he also says, my boss caters to them all the time and puts half of their workload on me, but in the end they always quit. Well, and the other side of that too is, I don't mind women that can meet the male standard, right? There's still a danger from a false accusation or something like that. But one of the ironic things, and probably nobody cares about this, it's kind of irrelevant, but I'm not attracted to women that want to play the traditional role, to be honest. I find women that just want to stay at home and raise babies to be boring, and especially in light of what kind of position that puts you in as a man, just totally irrelevant. Like, that's useless, right? Why put yourself in a situation where you're trying to role play the traditional man for a traditional woman when she can still divorce your ass anyway? So I actually find the women that can meet the male standard and don't rub it in men's faces or act like they're better than all the men around them, I find them to be attractive, right? I mean, that's not necessarily a good thing in terms of pursuing anything in that situation, but I don't like the women that just want to be treated special and they want to be the traditional woman, and then they can't find a man that wants to do that in a lot of cases. But the women that can actually meet the male standard, I have no real issue with them. The problem is that's not normal overall in our species. That's not typical, I should say. It's just, if a woman can meet the male standard or even do better, that's great, But a lot of those women, it gets to their head too, and they treat the men around them like shit So everything that I said just becomes irrelevant, right? If they act like that. So, but I don't mind the women that can meet that male standard, whatever it is, in a given environment, right? In a given work context or life thing. You know, some women, for whatever reason, they can at least come close to the level of being able to think like a guy, but those women are pretty rare. And a lot of them, like I say, because of the overall feminist culture that we have, they just treat men like shit anyway. They think they're better than all the men around them, when really they're probably not. But who wants to be around someone that acts that way anyhow? So the whole point of me going on that tangent was to say that if a woman can actually work with you and you can get stuff done, as long as you're not putting yourself in a position to be falsely accused or whatever, it's not really a problem. The problem is that most women are never expected or never intend to even try to meet that standard, in my opinion. The CL says, Rev, the truth hurts. Yep. Thanks for watching, CL. I appreciate all the viewers that come to watch my stream. I know that I pick random times and then don't announce it, and then I ramble like crazy, but I do appreciate all the people that watch despite those things. MGTOW Cowboy also says traditional conservatism is dead. I used to be a tradcon. It doesn't work. Men must adopt a new strategy. Right. That's kind of what I was saying about Peterson. Maybe I'm wrong to say he's kind of a traditional conservative voice, but that's pretty much the kind of, base that he seems to have. And again, like you say, it's like he has good ideas, or he can come up with good points, just like with the whole point where, like I say, he ended up calling MGTOWs weasels. To me, the important part of that, from that same lecture, before he called MGTOW weasels, or what led up to him saying that, is where he was trying to make the case, well, there are negative and positive attributes for women, that you can't just focus on the negative ones, you have to look at the positive ones too. Yeah, until you look at reality and you realize that no one encourages those positive attributes from women, right? Can women be nurturing? Can they be kind? Sure, probably. I mean, you can make the case that they can't, or that they don't give a shit about men anyway, and it's all just a facade. But yeah, I mean, can women have those positive traits that, make them good moms, or that, when they are required to actually meet their obligations and there's no such thing as no-fault divorce, can they be good wives? Yeah, probably. But guess what? Society doesn't encourage that. Society only encourages the negative aspects of female nature. So you can call MGTOW weasels if you want to, but, ultimately, there's nothing positive there. And yeah, he apologized for that, and I don't feel personal offense from that. But, I think sometimes that gets lost with why he ended up calling MGTOW weasels in the first place. It's because of this sort of fantasy that the theoretically positive things that women can do or offer are important. Well, no, they're not. If there's no actual realization of those positive things, then it makes no difference. So that's kind of my thing with Jordan Peterson, is he'll kind of go through this whole, we need to look at the technical, theoretical details of why things are this way, and it's just like, no, just come out and say women have control over the system, right? He can't do that and keep his position, right? It's already hard enough for him to resist the leftist onslaught, right? So he can't just come out and say those things. So maybe he believes some of those things, or realizes some of these things, and just can't say them too. But then there's limited efficacy, right? There's limited value in things that he does says, because he tries to kind of skirt around the truth still. And that's a totally separate phenomenon in a way, because you have that sort of politically correct versus telling people the truth schism almost today, where if you tell people the truth, you get shadow banned, like my channel. You get to a point where you can't make comments on videos without them being instantly deleted. which is a recent thing that I have going on. But as I mentioned, I think that's on my end, really. That's kind of irrelevant, though. The point that I'm trying to make is, you can focus on these technical details and compare male and female hierarchies, but why does it matter when women already just have control over the whole thing, right? There's no analysis of the hierarchy that's necessary, in my opinion, but Reverend 20 says, by today's standards, Peterson is tradcon. He's far right by modern Canadian standards. Yeah, I think he is kind of a moderate, really, but like you say, in Canada, he probably is far right. At least that's what he's labeled as, but he seems to embody the idea of traditional values being good, and in some cases that's probably true, and in some cases the traditional values are probably useless, but when all is said and done, that's not the society we have. So maybe that's kind of why he's not as popular now. Of course, people have a tendency to become popular and then become less popular over time in general, but maybe there are some people, particularly men, that are realizing that, well, that's nice, Jordan Peterson, but where are these positive traits that women are supposed to have in real life? Like, where is the incentive to not, once you realize where things stand between men and women, just go your own way anyhow, right? Like, where's the incentive to do something different than that and try to be this hardworking person that doesn't necessarily do things in a way that's going to lead to a positive result for himself? What's the point in that? So, it requires more, right? It requires, again, I don't know all of what Jordan Peterson has said, of course, but it requires moving beyond some of that, I think. The man with no name says, yep, the you go girl, you are strong and powerful. Dan, all the negative traits of females are pushed and applauded. Exactly. The positive traits that they could have, and I would say that, yeah, maybe that's valid. Women are not necessarily all terrible people, but when they're encouraged to be terrible people, most of them are going to be that way. And I think that's pretty much what the situation is now. But most people can't even say this, right? Like, what I'm saying is completely outside the Overton window, outside what is considered to be politically acceptable, so, or even acceptable in conversation in our culture. So the Rev says, I'm shadow banned like a mofo. It's all good though, I'm fine with it. Yeah, I think pretty much most of us are that are in the manosphere. There are probably a few that might not be shadow banned, like some of the really big channels, but they're in danger of potentially getting deleted. That's a different topic, of course, but also not my problem. Not directly. I don't like to see those channels be in danger, but I always wonder when YouTube's going to pull the plug sometimes. The Rev says, or I already read that. CL says, my comments get deleted all the time as well. Yeah, my problem recently is I'm thinking that just on my computer, just on my laptop, when I make a comment, it gets deleted instantly no matter what I say, no matter, even if I reply to an old comment that I've had, it gets the new comment gets deleted. But if I try it on my phone, I can still comment from the same account. So I think it's got something to do with my computer, really. If I'm being honest, I'd love to blame YouTube for it, but... And it sort of still is their fault, right? They're still deleting my comments, but... Red Pill Addict says the power of the WAP is undefeated. Okay, I really don't know what that means. I'm not going to lie. So, again, just to kind of ask the question one last time. If men and women were to be equal in society, and you were actually trying to achieve equality between men and women, what would that even look like, right? Is there any example from history, any example even in theory that you could come up with without just making men and women the same, which they're not, right? Without basically lying about what men and women are. And I don't mean just in the sense of women being inferior to men in every way, or in the sense of, like I say, not having equality based on being equally human. But I mean men and women really being equal in terms of power in a relationship, in terms of authority, in terms of responsibility, in terms of, men and women making equal money, which women, a lot of feminists will say, oh, there's this wage gap because women don't work the jobs, don't go into the fields that are more dangerous and more difficult in a lot of cases. What would that even look like for men and women to be equal, right? And so I question as I've thought about this over time, I've decided, or I've leaned more to the side of, no, men and women can't be equal. It doesn't even make sense, right? And it doesn't make sense because we're just too different. How do you make things that, a square and a circle equal to each other? So that's my thought on that. If someone has a way that men and women could even theoretically be equal, if there could be really a state of equality, not just mutual benefit, but actual equality, what would that entail? What would that look like? The more I think about it, the more I think that that's not really even possible. It's not desirable. Men and women would both be miserable, but what would that even look like? And how, again, do you compensate for the soft power that women have, right? I don't really need to meet the male standard. Oh, look at me, I'm cute, I should get away with this. Things that basically involve the preferential treatment that women get both from men and from other women. How do you compensate for that? Even if the laws are equal, you get some of what we have now, right? Not all the laws are equal. Women are the only ones that have, reproductive rights really and so forth. But even if all the laws were equal, women would still have the upper hand to a large extent. And then they demand laws that give them preferential treatment as well. That's pretty much where we're at, to be honest. But I don't see how it's possible, right? And egalitarians, like I say, I don't have anything against them, really, but I just don't see how their vision of egalitarianism plays out in reality. I just don't see it. I don't see how it makes sense. Reverend 20p, I'm not going to repeat what Reverend 20p. I'm not going to say that on here just because I'm not going to try to get my stream taken down or anything. CL says they are not equal. Exactly. I mean, I just don't see how it's possible. Forest Groomer. You cut the corners off the square. Yeah, you can do that, but it's still not really a circle, is it? The other sort of silly analogy that I used is, you could take an orange and an apple, and the orange probably weighs more, so you can cut off part of the orange and say they weigh the same. Oh, now they're equal. No, they're not. You just have an orange with part of it cut off and an apple. They may weigh the same, but they're still not the same. It's just you can't make things that are that different equal. I just don't see it. And honestly, I really would like dialogue from egalitarians on that, because I think that, you could say, well, we don't think men and women are really equal, but what we really want is equity. What we really want is value for both genders. That's not going to be possible in our society today, realistically. But even on a theoretical level, I don't see what that looks like. Unless you just make men and women the same, which they're not. You can't really do that. So I don't see it really being a valid idea that men and women can actually be equal. So I've already really gone into a lot of ranting on just on the topics I've brought up so far. But there is one last thing that I wanted to bring up. And we don't have to get too much into this. But it's just, again, just kind of like with my idea of, can men and women really be equal? This is similar in the sense that I'm kind of asking this as a question, as kind of somewhat incomplete idea. And that is this, and I've thought more about this as time has gone along as well. At what point does someone become evil? What I mean technically, or kind of more specifically, is with stuff that we see going on today, politically, culturally, and everything, at what point does someone go from being a useful idiot or just really being misinformed, really being led toward, believing things that don't make sense? At what point does that person go from just being kind of in the dark or dumb or just misinformed to being actually part of evil, right? And this is kind of almost like a philosophical question, and I don't expect that there's really an easy or simple answer to that. Maybe there is, I don't know. But when do you go, for example, from being someone that just believes what CNN tells you to being a hardcore SJW that wants Marxism? Where's the line with that? Because so many people are being brainwashed who I don't think are really evil people, right? They don't live for the idea of, I want to fuck up society and, blame men for my problems, just like, with feminists, that's where that example comes into play. Or, blame this other group of people, maybe I should put it that way, for my problems. Or, I want to create destruction, or I want to cause problems for other people, versus I just believe what CNN tells me and I would never do these kinds of things to others, but I just am not thinking for myself. When do you go from not thinking to yourself to being so consumed by the SJW mentality that you basically become an evil person, to be honest? Like, you want something that is going to be so harmful to both society at large, but to the, to individuals, because you want to, essentially say that they're racist or they're sexist or whatever, so therefore we can take their rights away. At what point do you actually become evil yourself instead of just being a useful idiot? Or is there no differentiation to be made? And if that's the case, are most of the people around us now pretty much evil? Now, this all comes from the standpoint of my own biases, right? Like, we're assuming that being an SJW is evil, or being a Marxist is not. You're not a good person. If you're really a Marxist and you know what you believe and you support that, you're basically evil, because that's an evil ideology, right? So obviously someone that is an SJW is not going to have the same assessment of good and evil as what I have here. It's going to be the opposite, probably, because most SJWs think that anybody that's different than them is actually evil, and from their perspective, they're actually the good ones. But, realizing what I'm saying here with my kind of overall view on what's going on with our politics and with this virus stuff and everything, at what point does someone transition from just being, you're kind of not aware of what's happening, but you're not evil. You try to do good for the people around you, your intentions are good. You're not really an SJW. You just don't know what the hell is actually going on, in terms of the political struggle today, the ideological struggle, versus someone that totally buys in to the ideology and they become consumed by it and it becomes their identity, right? At what point precisely do you stop treating someone like, they just don't know what they're talking about, and you just say, no, this person's actually bad and I just want to stay away from them. They support Antifa or BLM or whatever, and they're bad. They might still be a useful idiot, but they've been totally consumed by this to the point where, they basically hate white people, or they basically hate conservatives, or they basically hate groups of people that they should really have no qualms with, but they do because they've become evil. I don't know where that line is exactly. I've been thinking more and more about this as things continue to kind of degrade in our society with a lot of the stuff we see. You know, the SJWism, if you want to call it that, the virus stuff. We have to make these people get vaccines. We're going to discriminate against you if you don't get the vaccine, even though, as I mentioned with my first point, there's no one to protect. If everybody has access to the vaccine, you can no longer say that we need to protect other people. Even if you think that argument's valid, just to recap that very quickly, it makes no sense to think that, well, if other people can protect themselves, I still need to wear a mask. No, you're just punishing people that don't go along with the control. That's the only conclusion that makes any sense now. So if you know this and you support this and you still want to make people get vaccinated or punish them, are you evil? And have you been consumed by this? I don't know what the answer to that is. If someone that you love and care about gets to that point, at what point are they basically such a bad influence, such a, basically an evil person now, if they've been consumed by this ideology? At what point do you give up on them, honestly? At what point do you kind of move away from them and say, I thought you just didn't know what was going on, but you're actually into this, and I don't want to deal with you anymore. It has to suck to be in that situation. I haven't had things go that far yet with someone in my family, but I could see it happening potentially. And there are some that are hardcore leftists that, I've always known, or I've never really been friends with them because I know that that's where they stand with things. But see, Forrest Groomer agrees with my square and circle analysis. Yeah, that's kind of what I think people are trying to do, is they're just, between men and women, they're trying to make them equal based on something that's just not really valid. It's just, I don't see how you do it. You can't cut off the end of an orange and say, well, it weighs the same as a pear or an apple, so that must be the same now. It doesn't work. Red Pill Addict 36 says, I would say most people on this planet are at least a good 90% are evil, right? 90% are evil. I guess I have to go kind of include that. If we're really going to think about that, you almost have to say, well, what is human nature to begin with? That's something that I really didn't mention, but you kind of have to think about that. I agree. I think I don't like to use biblical language here very often. I am a Christian. I don't talk about that kind of stuff very much because I don't usually feel too compelled to talk about those things. That's kind of more of a Sunrise Hoodie type of discussion to have, where you put MGTOW and those kinds of topics together. I hope he makes content again someday, if everyone knows who Sunrise Hoodie is. But in this case, I will say this. I think most people are sinful. I think we have a sin nature. Now, again, for people that don't believe in God or whatever, it like I say, that doesn't necessarily matter, because you look around and people still have a sin nature, right? People have a tendency toward evil. So I do think, yeah, you could say 90% of people maybe are consumed by this. I think most people, though, just go along with what they can get away with, right? Most people, I think, most people in general, even though they may have a sin nature, in my opinion, are in between good and evil, right? They can choose either one, but they mostly just go along with whatever that is easier. If you shame people, if you punish people for doing bad things, most people will actually be good, because that's actually going to be better for them. But then when you encourage people to be evil, most people become evil. And like I say, I don't know where we stand with that necessarily, like, where's the line? Where does someone go from being basically amoral and just going along with the flow, or believing whatever they're taught and not thinking for themselves, which is bad, but in itself is not necessarily evil per se, to actually being consumed with, you know, the SJW totalitarianism supporting, I want to take your rights away stuff, which I would say is totally evil, right? When someone gets to that point where they support that kind of thing, where they go that far with it. Dan W58 says, I think SJWs feel oppressed, like the world is run by conservatives and want freedom from conservatism at any price. Yeah, I think that's true. I think a lot of them also buy into the sort of classical Marxist dichotomy, right? And that may be kind of a weird thing to say, but a lot of people don't realize, a lot of SJWs don't even realize, I think, that what they're buying into is really Marxism. What you do with, or what Marxism basically does, is it separates people into the oppressed and oppressor classes. So I think conservatives are seen as one of the oppressor classes, but it's also based on other groups, white people, men oppress women. You hear this all the time, right? Feminism is basically, if it didn't come from Marxism, it fits hand in glove with Marxism, right? Christians are bad, right? But somehow, even though Muslims are, you know, attacking different areas of the West, and I'm not saying that, you know, this goes on all the time, but, you know, even though that's the case, oh, you can't say anything about Muslims because most Muslims don't support that. But then conservative white Christian men are considered to be just automatically evil. There's a reason for that, right? This has been orchestrated so that the oppressor groups in this Marxist dichotomy are the bad guys, and those are the people that will actually defend Western values the most. I mean, that it's portrayed that way for a reason. So yes, as I agree, SJWs do feel oppressed. They're taught to feel that way. But I don't think it's just conservatives. I think it's anybody that fits into a convenient oppressor category. Some of the stuff, I think I've talked about this in the last stream, but some of the stuff that you see now with Stop Asian Hate, you know what that is? It's an attempt to see whether Asians will be part of the, you know, will see themselves as being oppressed, right? Let's see if we can put Asians, even though they have been generally the most successful racial minority group in our society, in the United States at least, and probably other Western countries as well. Let's see if they'll take the bait. Let's see if they'll see themselves as being oppressed so that they can join the SJW Marxist fold. To me, that's what's going on with that. Because it's not based on anything real. Asians are successful in our society. The whole thing that this started with was some guy that went into a massage parlor and killed a bunch of hookers, basically. You know, it was the massage parlor part of it was a cover. It was one of those massage places. And he killed some white people too, but the media leaves that out. The reason he did it was because of religion, right? It's because he basically became a religious fanatic, but he had been a customer there, and he saw those people working there, those women, as the problem. So the media spins it as Asian hate because they want to see whether whether Asians will become part of the fold, whether they'll see themselves as SJWs too and see other, you know, groups of people as the supposed oppressors. So that to me is I know that sounds like, you know, some abstract shit, but I've kind of thought about this for a long time, and I kind of have a background in political science to some extent. So, you know, I'm not trying to say that makes me well educated. It really doesn't. But I've thought about a lot of this stuff, right, for a long time, and that's what's going on. It's not SJWs feel oppressed, but it's not just by conservatives. It's by any group that the leaders of our society, the elites basically, those that control the government and the media to a large extent, it's the groups of people that they want to label as the oppressors, whoever that happens to be. And it's really a variety of different groups, I think. Not just conservatives, although you're right, Dan W58, that's part of it. They want to make conservatives the oppressors, but it's not just conservatives. It's any group that our leaders want to sort of take power away from. It's any group that they want to target. And the SJWs, in a sense, are useful idiots, but at the same time, they basically are part of an evil system. And at what point do you transition from just being a useful idiot to actually being pretty much evil and somebody that, if you're aware of that, you want to stay away from that person, right? They're too consumed by that. They don't just believe what CNN tells them. They're actually going out and trying to basically take other people's rights away and trying to, grow the size and scope of government and move us toward more of a totalitarian society. I mean, that's clearly, to me, where we're headed. So where do people go from, oh, I voted for Biden because I'm a dummy and society, the media told me to do that, to actually being someone that has gone too far? Or is that enough? Does someone that vote, do you say, well, you voted for Biden, you're not someone that I want to deal with because you're evil? I think that's a little bit too harsh, because I think you have to look at the intent. But when the intent becomes, I want to burn down your house because you're a white male, if it gets to that point, that's a clear case, a clear-cut example of that person being evil then. So where's the line? I continue to think about that. Maybe that seems like a silly topic to bring up, I don't know, but to me, where the reason it's important is because where do you end your affiliation with someone? Where do you say, you know what, you're a fucking Marxist and I don't want to deal with you? I've kind of struggled with that to some extent, over the last few years. There have been a few friends where I just decided I was gonna, delete them on social media and just not talk to them ever again because they're openly socialist or openly SJWs. And it's like, yeah, we might have been friends in high school or college, but you've chosen the side of evil. And I cannot condone someone that is openly supporting Marxist ideas. If you have an idea of what that is and you support that, you've chosen evil. And, or is that too harsh, guys? Is that too much? Is that not really fair? Does it take more than that for someone to really be evil? That's kind of the question that I'm asking here. Max Live TV says, when you decide to join an evil organization and do their bidding, or just doing evil on your own, right? That might be kind of a good benchmark or a good criteria to look at, right? If you're just watching the TV and being stupid, you're not actually taking an action. But when you support, like, let's say, I'll say BLM or Antifa or something like that, maybe I shouldn't mention their names on my stream, to be honest. Might get my stream banned. But, yeah, if you actually start to be active in supporting, evil in that way, then yeah, I would definitely say that crosses the line. Let's see. I'm trying to skip over some of the conversation between people just so that I don't read something that's not relevant to, that wasn't really addressed to me specifically. Dan W58 says the fact is the exact opposite of the truth doesn't register with them. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Is that enough for someone to really be a bad person, though? Like, where does that line come into play? I struggle with that. I really do. I don't know. And I think we kind of have to know. Because as things continue to go to shit in this society, I think more and more of the time, people are going to have to choose, right? People are going to have to choose, do I support this drive toward Marxism and totalitarianism, or do I oppose it? And to me, it's clear which side is morally good versus evil. Like, I'm not really getting into defending my views so much because that's not the point. The good side is the people that oppose that. The evil side is the people that support it. I have one friend from high school that I was pretty good friends with, and so far I've kind of grandfathered him in terms of me still sort of considering him a friend, even though we don't really have contact anymore. But I know that he's sympathetic toward BLM. And I think if that continues or becomes, exacerbated at all to where he's going out and rallying for that stuff and shows evidence of that, I think that's kind of the line. I think he's kind of right on the line, honestly. And I feel bad about it, right? My emotions do come into play. I'm not going to lie, but what's the point? What's the point? At what point do you stop being friends with someone that has just been totally corrupted? I don't know. Oh crap, there's a whole bunch of comments that's further down that I haven't been reading. Maybe that's why I had that blue arrow telling me to continue down on my chat for the last half an hour. I didn't pay attention to what that was. I'm not too smart sometimes. Red Pill Addict 36 says, good is bad and bad is good. Just the way it is. As soon as I see signs of SJW behavior, I cut them off. Doesn't matter, family, friend, or foe. That seems reasonable, but what exactly would be a sign of SJW behavior and what would not quite be to that point? So, even with that, it's like, let's say they voted for Biden. Is that enough for them to be an SJW? Because you could make the case that it basically is, right? Because that's who they all support. But is everybody that supported Biden an SJW, or a lot of them useful idiots? Or were some of them deceased people? From what I've heard, there's that rumor that some of the write-in ballot, or not write-in, but mail-in ballots are from deceased people. But like I say, sometimes it's easy. Like, I support Black Lives Matter. Well, that person's exhibiting SJW behavior. But if it's just like, hey, I think we need to do more for black people, that's probably not quite enough to be an SJW. So some of that can still be in the gray area, I think. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just not good enough at just making that sort of distinguishing analysis between the two. Red Pill Addict 36 also says, I love Sunrise, and the Rev says, I miss Hoodie, hope he's doing well. I know he hasn't made content for probably 6 or 8 months, which, that I have no issue with that. I go months at a time without making content myself, but I just hope that nothing's happened to him, right? His channel and everything's still up, but in the past, when he's been busy, he's made an update every couple of months at least to say I'm busy. I don't think he's been away for that long, for how, compared to how long he's been away now. So I hope he's doing all right. I hope, that he's just busy and has just kind of put this to the side rather than, anything else, because we really don't know. I hope he's doing well, like the Rev says. Dan W58 says, societies need to change and evolve, and the problem presently is we have one group that want to allow no change whatsoever, and another wants any change at any price, and it ends up being controlled by China. Well, I think there's validity in that. That's kind of the typical right-wing, left-wing, conservative, liberal dichotomy, right? So I don't have a disagreement with that, but I think a lot of it is basically being orchestrated by elites in this country as well, right? I think that more or less we're at a point now, this is just my take on it, that conservatives don't even realize what's happened. So it's not even so much necessarily, in my view, that conservatives don't want any change. It's that they can't even recognize the changes that have already taken place. And they're too busy talking about how patriotic they are and how much they love America and how great the Constitution is, to realize that a lot of their rights have already been taken away, to be honest. So I think a lot of conservatives are just in the dark. And then you also have, I think, the aspect of the right being so splintered to begin with. You have so many different factions on the right that want different things. You have your corporate entities, you have your, which a lot of them have shifted to the left, and they're really just in bed with the government anyway. But you have, your religious right people, the people that, want to basically be a vassal to Israel. I'll just come out and say that, in my opinion. Then you have the people that are the traditional conservatives. Then you have your small government conservatives. Those are not the same groups. And you could have different groups to throw in there. I don't think I need to continue to come up with different factions. But the point is, the right and conservatives in general, it's not just that they don't want change. It's that they don't recognize, like I say, the reality of the political situation today. They can't recognize the changes that have already happened. Where the left is just, like you say, they want whatever change they can just based on kind of a feeling, emotional reaction toward stuff not being the way that they should be, things not being the way that they should be. And so you do have that sort of change versus no change going on, but to me it's more of a recognition or lack thereof on both sides of the kind of puppet masters that are controlling everything. It's like, it's all just a facade. It's all just sort of a, let's do whatever's convenient so that the government and corporations can get more power over things and make the rich richer. That to me is pretty much what is going on from an overall political perspective, if that makes sense. But I agree societies have to change and evolve, but I think that almost happens kind of, it's not irrespective of the conservative versus liberal mechanism, but it's as long as the conservatives aren't completely in control, there's going to be some level of change. But the problem is that it's all being kind of orchestrated by the same people to some extent, to a large extent, on both sides anymore, but especially on the left, right? The left is the mechanism for, in my view, introducing Marxism by pretending that it's not Marxism and then acting like that's positive change. So, like I said, I'm kind of a center-right person. People probably already know that. I'm kind of a libertarian-leaning, right-of-center person, so I'm kind of biased in terms of, I can be biased in terms of looking at the overall political compass, but I think that things have already changed, and that people on the right, a lot of conservatives, just, they can't deal with it. They can't realize it. They're too in the dark about it. Red Pill Addict 36 says, if the world followed the rules of religion, it would be a pretty good place. I think it depends on which religion you're looking at, and there could be like a whole debate about that probably, but you could have a system where people are responsible for acting in a way that's not sinful, that's not evil, and that they actually have to be held accountable. So in that sense, I agree with you. Let's see. Damn, I've got a lot of comments. I appreciate you guys commenting on my little ranting and opinion making. Red Pill Addict 36 says, religion is not a factor anymore, especially if you have gay pastors. Yeah, that's a good sign. I mean, you're right. Religion is not really a powerful force in our society at this point. like it or not. That's kind of where it stands. It can still be valuable to individuals, of course, but it's not meaningful in any sort of... A lot of the... I'll just say this. To a large extent, Christianity has just become an extension of the culture that we have anyway, right? A lot of Christians just try to basically adopt worldly views and then say God this and God that. I'm kind of weird, just like with a lot of other stuff. I'm a Christian, but I don't like what a lot of other Christians do. I'm kind of an outcast, just like with pretty much everything else. I don't quite fit in. I've discussed that before. Probably no one's interested in that, but I've never really had a group that I fit into. And this is another example, right? Like, I have my belief system, and I have, faith, but I don't really agree with what a lot of other Christians do. Because a lot of what they do is just, it reflects worldly ideas anyway, right? It's just wrapped up in this thing that makes people feel better by saying that, they believe in God too. But that's a totally different topic, I think. Let's see, Dan W58, he replied to Red Pill Addict, says, "This is where I disagree with most of the manosphere and with the political right. If I'm required to become religious to become part of the right, well, it's not going to happen." Fair enough. Should leave religion out of it. Yeah, fair enough. I like I said before, the right today, and this is not necessarily a good thing, but there are all kinds of different factions on the right. Some of them couldn't give a crap less about religion. Some of them are business oriented. They want low taxes, basically. Or you have a lot of individual people. They make money, and they make good money, and they want lower taxes, so they're on the right based on, just those issues alone, to some extent at least. Of course, there are more issues than that, but like I say, you also have your just small government conservatives. You can be a traditional conservative and not really be religious. You can just think that family values and stuff like that are the way to go because they worked in the past. They don't really work now, but you can be on the right for sure and not be religious. But is that really a path toward political success? Not really. I mean, I think the left has kind of won anyhow, but that's not necessarily relevant. So Red Pill Addict says, well, he replied to Dan, and he says, "You cannot deny being in a sinful nature is destructive." True, although not everyone's going to think that that's our nature. I believe that's our nature, but I can understand someone who's not a Christian or not religious not thinking that way. Max Live TV, thanks for joining the chat, says Biden and Kamala are evil. Yeah. Unfortunately, I would say 80% of our politicians are basically part of the system of usury, so they're pretty much evil. Most of them. Dan W. also says, "I've been in and out of religion all my life, so I'm no stranger to it. But what I say is something that unites by force cannot be a foundation for anything good." I would say that's probably true. Because if you have to use force, that means that probably there's something messed up going on, underlying that. Something that basically they use force because they can't appeal to anything else. Although, I guess one challenge to that would be, do most people even know what's kind of good for them? Although, again, I agree that you don't have to use force, but you can just, sometimes appealing to reason is not enough to unite people either. So you kind of have to look at the negative aspects of human nature in general and try to work around it. Red Pill Addict says, I consider that most politicians evil. They are, no doubt, especially today. Probably throughout most of history as well. But, you know, I don't think it's anything unique that most politicians are evil. But the Rev says, Dan, what's wrong with mentioning the Bureau of Land Management? Yeah, that's the acronym I was referring to. Yeah, that's exactly what it stood for. Dan W58 says, you might say force is not being used, but that would be a half-truth. Children are forced by their parents to embrace their religion quite often. And when young, force was the norm. Yep, that's true. But like I say, I think you kind of have to work around human nature to have a sustainable system almost, which I agree you shouldn't use force. I'm someone that believes in small government, so there's no reason to force people into believing that you shouldn't have big government, really. But a lot of the time people just, they're so emotional and so impulse-based that, for example, well, I can't really come up with an example to back that claim. I was going to say that you know, kind of have to use force to get people to stop doing certain things. Like, you have to kind of be able to say, the example I was going to use is women's right to vote, because there's going to be a tendency, especially when society becomes settled, for most people to say, oh yeah, you know, everybody should have the right to vote. And in some cases, you kind of have to make people not just accept that. But that's kind of a bad example, because you can still persuade people that that's a bad idea. Like I said, the only thing I would say to that, I can't really argue against that you shouldn't use force to compel people to unite behind a certain idea. But I do think people kind of have a tendency to respond to that more, right? You still have to kind of work within human nature to have a system that can work. And what happens when they don't respond to other things? Should you then try to use force to compel people to do what you want? I would say no, but you might be able to make a case for that. Let's see. I am so far behind on these comments, guys. I apologize. The Rev says, you can't save everyone. I've stopped trying. Pick your battles, so to speak. Useful deceased idiots, yeah. Well, you could be a freaking genius, and if they steal your identity after you die and say that you voted for somebody that, yeah. Now you're a useful deceased idiot, whether you were an idiot in real life or not. I'm not sure, Rev, what that was a response to now with trying to save everyone and picking your battles. To be honest, I've been rambling for so long that I can't remember what I've discussed and what I haven't. And some of this is just like conversation that is between members in the chat, which is great. I like to see that. Eccentric says, the evil right now is people not wanting to work but be taken care of by the people that are working. That's part of it, but at the same time, there's also, I don't disagree with that, but there's also the fact that people do things based on incentive. So if you basically take people that work and then you don't allow them to reap the benefits of their labor, and then you take people that have, let's say you're someone that's lost your business because of this corona nonsense, or maybe you got laid off because of that. What's the incentive to go back to work when you're making more money on unemployment, or as much, basically, right? People do things based on self-interest too. So if you make it in their self-interest to not work, yeah, that's kind of what you can expect. I think the state, the apparatus behind it, and the people that pull the strings with that are really the main evil force there, in my opinion. But people are just going to do what they can do, what they can get away with. Dan W58 says, we are about to enter the biggest social disaster in human history. SJW versus MGTOW. Human population will go down by the 90% probably. Well, it kind of depends. I think it kind of depends on who else steps up to the plate, right? I think there's a lot of stuff that could happen. And it almost involves getting into kind of SHTF, shit hits the fan conversations, which I don't feel like I really have enough expertise to make a whole lot of statements about. But I think things could happen a variety of different ways. If there's a huge war or some sort of nuclear disaster that results, basically it's going to result from Western society collapsing in some form. What's going to happen when Western society collapses? Because civilizations come and go. Our society, our civilization can collapse, and frankly, the world will carry on. But if there's a huge war or some sort of huge disaster that affects the environment in some way, we could actually basically destroy all life on Earth. In an absolute worst case scenario, we could wipe out all life if there's a bunch of nuclear weapons or something that go off that are used to basically very, very catastrophic effect. It could destroy the whole planet and most of the life on the planet. But on the other hand, is that the most likely outcome? I don't know. The West is going to destroy itself, but I think sometimes people get caught up in that and they don't realize, civilizations have risen and fallen throughout all of history. There'll be China, there will be, some other sort of empire that replaces ours, that replaces the United States and Western Europe and all that. So it could be the worst disaster the world ever experiences, especially because of our level of technology and the high population that we have now, right? There's going to be a lot of people that suffer and pass away, that are killed. But ultimately, I don't, it could take so many different forms, but I think we have to remember that unless we really destroy the planet itself, there'll be other civilizations that take our place. And the cycle will kind of just repeat itself probably. But it is bad, SJWs and this overall, SJWs will be done away with once their usefulness is gone, right? If we have a totalitarian state, it'll just crack down and say, no more protests, no more anything. If you speak out against the state, we will just arrest you or take your life. So that will end eventually if we reach a point where we have a totalitarian government. But honestly, that can only last so long before it tears itself apart, before the state itself tears itself apart. So that's my take on it. I don't really know, I think it could take a lot of different forms, but the question is what happens when Western society pretty much caves in on itself? In my opinion, that's kind of the question that I wonder about. Red Pill Addict says, maybe it's the only way to restore order. I'm kind of thinking a reset is needed. Yeah, I mean, we're going to have some form of reset. The question is kind of who rises to power afterwards and what's the state of our planet and our environment, right? Even from that perspective, we're going to have a reset eventually. Like, our planet can only support so many people, and you could debate whether we've exceeded that or whether it's still down the line quite a ways. But we have close to 8 billion people. I know over 7 in the world. In some places that's more of a problem than others, but eventually something will give, right? Eventually there's going to be food shortages. Eventually there's going to be a war. Eventually something's going to give. And Western society falling, collapsing is probably going to be a big part of that too. I don't know what it's going to look like, though. Like I say, I don't know if I'm the one that's best to speculate on that. The Rev says, Dan, just a comment in general. I used to try to help/save people. You can't help or save someone who doesn't want the help and or can't be saved. Some people can't be saved, a waste of time. Right. I'm glad you actually mentioned that. Because I'm kind of the same way to a large extent. For me, one of the standards that I use, and I don't want to sound arrogant here or like, I think that I have certain qualities that make it worthwhile for people to want to talk to me, but other people don't. But for me, someone has to show that they can think for themselves. If someone can't think for themselves, there's no point in trying to kind of open up other possibilities to them. Like, you can be nice to them and you can care about them to some extent, or to a large extent even, but you can't directly help them by getting them to understand what's going on, right? That's kind of a more specific point or issue than just trying to help them in general. But to me, if you can't really reach someone because they can't think for themselves, if they can't think for themselves, you can't reach them, right? That's what I'm trying to say. And if that's the case, why waste time? Why waste time? I've learned that, even just 6 or 8 years ago, I used to be willing to kind of argue with anyone about almost anything, right? As long as I didn't feel like they were going to kick my ass or, pull a weapon on me or something, I used to be willing to argue about anything. And what I found out was it just, created animosity, because I didn't vet those people. I didn't say, well, has this person shown me that they're really going to consider what I'm saying, or is this just a waste of energy? And to me, yeah, in a variety of ways, I'm thinking more in terms of getting people to understand things, getting people to listen to what you have to say. But just in general, I think there has to be kind of evidence that that person will listen to what you're saying, or that you can actually, that they're open to you helping them, or whatever the case may be. There's going to be a different set of criteria, or there's different contexts where that can take place. But I think it's important to kind of require people to say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do to think for myself, or this is what I'm trying to do to get something to work, or whatever. And then you can help them if you can see that they're actually trying to understand something. But otherwise, I think it's kind of a waste of energy in a lot of cases. Dan W58 says, nukes are overrated. Melting of the Arctic and disruption of ocean currents is the trigger. Elon Musk is the only one doing something to fix the problem. Well, I kind of thought that while I was using the nuclear example, because that's kind of a, Dan, you're back in the 1990s or in the Cold War type of mindset. But that was just an example that was convenient. You also have stuff like pathogens and contagions that would be, it would make the coronavirus look like a footnote in history if, the worst case scenario would take place, or something close to that. So there are a lot of things that could really, really wipe out a lot of people that are unpleasant, right? My thing about the melting of the Arctic and stuff like that, you're probably not going to agree with this, and that's fine. I'm pretty skeptical about all the climate change stuff, right? I mean, I'm not saying that I know that it's not happening. It could very well be a huge problem, but I think that that's just another somewhat manufactured crisis that is being used to increase government control. My take on it is that there's more ideology behind that than there is actual science. And yes, I know you probably disagree with that, but we don't really have data over a long enough period of time for me to say we know with certainty. And I understand statistical analysis. I understand things like confidence intervals and stuff like that. So I do have some familiarity with data collection and whatnot, but I just don't see it. Like, it would be like looking at the stock market over a 100-day period and saying, well, it's just going to keep going up forever, and we know that. As old as the Earth is and as many cycles as it goes through in terms of climate, are humans having a negative impact on the climate? Of course. Does that include the temperature going up perpetually as long as we are putting carbon dioxide in the air? I don't know. I'm not really convinced with that. I think there's more political rhetoric, more political motivations behind that personally than there is science. I know that in a lot of cases, that's used against people, or you're ignorant if you believe that way, but that's just honestly my take on it. I think a lot of that is overblown and made to look worse than what it is because of political reasons more than anything else. See, Red Pill Addict says, I try to help others, but what's the point if they're going to continue to live the same type of life? Well, yeah, and I mean, it depends on what the subject matter is. Like, if someone lost their job, or someone, in general they've done their best and they're trying at life and they're open to help, then, you can help them. But sometimes, especially when it comes to things where it's like, that it's not going to do any good in the long run. Sometimes you have to kind of, especially with women. Let me just be honest. That's the most clear example of women have this kind of expectation that men should be nice to them and men should help them with things. And I have no issue. I'm not the kind of person that has an issue with holding doors open for people. I do that for almost everybody if, they're going to come through the door shortly. That kind of thing. Oh, can you reach this on the upper shelf of a grocery store aisle? I don't have a problem doing that for really anybody. But when it comes to stuff like, hey, I need a ride somewhere, my car broke down, sorry darling, you could say that I tried to kidnap you or try to do sexual things to you if I give you a ride somewhere and I don't know you, so that's not going to happen, right? Some of the helping other people really ties into that kind of stuff too, of is there really going to be a good outcome to this, or is the environment basically telling you, no, you need to opt out of this situation? Because people with good intentions are punished more and more often, I think, as our society continues to kind of slide downhill. Dan W. says, bears in the north are not so skeptical. They have real trouble climbing on ice that is too thin. Polar ice used to be like 20 meters thick when I was young. It is down to like 2 meters nowadays. That's circumstantial, though. I mean, that's my thing. Could it be that overall the Earth is going to continue to warm up and that's going to be more of a problem? Sure, that could be going on. If it is happening, could it be because of humans? Yeah, sure, it could be that way. But again, I see circumstantial evidence, not enough data. If you consider each year to be a data point, and how many years can you go back and get precise enough data? I don't buy it. I don't think it's conclusive. That's pretty much my position. I don't think climate change in that sense of the Earth is definitely getting too hot because of people. I'm not convinced that that's been conclusively shown. I think it's more just about, well, China can continue to put carbon dioxide in the air, but we want these government controls here so that we can basically start to merge the economy or merge the government with corporations. I think it's just a power thing. Dan also says, Dan W58 also says, which is my other problem with the right, the requirement to be an enviro skeptic. So the choices between SJW on the left, religious fanaticism, and enviro skepticism on the right. I don't think that's really accurate. And like I say, the main reason for that is that the right is made up of so many different factions. I mean, you can totally disagree with me. I don't think there are a lot of people on the right. If you hear, well, I wouldn't recommend this, but if you watched any of the last presidential debates, no, that's not right. The 2016 presidential debates, where the environment and global warming and climate change came up with the Republican debate many times, and most of them said, oh, we believe it, oh, we're not skeptical, and they just try to kind of placate the, kind of give a narrative, in my view, that you have to believe in climate change, and that it's man-made, and that it's one of the worst disasters we're ever going to have. It's, a policy priority. Most of them said that they don't believe that, from what I remember. And so I think that that's something that, honestly, the mainstream media may be telling you. I'm not saying that you're not doing your own analysis, but a lot of conservatives or people on the right are not really on board with the idea that a lot of them believe that climate change is real. I'm skeptical about it myself, and I can only try to kind of illustrate and kind of defend my own points of view. And I realize that you are going to disagree with me a lot, but to me, the evidence just isn't there. It's not conclusive. And to say that we have to prioritize this, I think that that's driven by, like I say, the elites wanting more government power over industry, more government power over the economy, and people's lives. I think that's really what it is, because even if you wanted to do something about it, without China being on board, it really doesn't make sense anyway. And I'm not convinced. Again, you actually have to have the data, not just circumstantial evidence like, well, this ice cap's thinner. To me, that's circumstantial evidence. It's not actually worth prioritizing as one of the biggest political issues of our time based on that. Red Pill Addict says, I choose MGTOW. The Rev says Cialis is rock hard. Dan says, I chose MGTOW too. I'm just not a conservative MGTOW. I don't believe the solution is found somewhere in the past. Well, that's more than fair. If you've watched some of Barbarossa's old videos, he basically talks about how he doesn't want to return to traditionalism, and he's one of the, you can't really say a founder of MGTOW philosophy, but he's one of the original sort of old guard MGTOWs who really started to spread the message back around, the early 2010s. So, I'm not saying he's not conservative, but I don't think he is. I'm not sure, but you don't have to be conservative to be welcome in the manosphere and in MGTOW. I know sometimes the vast majority of those in the manosphere tend to be conservative. I consider myself to be center right. But not really conservative. I don't think my position on that is there's nothing really worth conserving in our society anymore. Why should we conserve things when our society is already beyond a point of no return, in my opinion? So, that's my issue. I'm not conservative. I'm more of a libertarian leaning, yes, on the right, but I don't like to be called conservative. A lot of people will call me that, but I don't believe that being conservative has value, right? If you're conservative, you're going to think, well, these institutions like marriage need to be preserved. No, marriage doesn't work. Not in a society with no-fault divorce. That's just one of many examples. So I think, honestly, a lot of conservatives are just controlled opposition at this point anyway. I see this on Fox News on a fairly regular basis, where they're just basically kind of whining about the left taking control, but which I do too, to be fair. But their response is, we need to go back to the 1950s. Well, that's just not going to happen. That we don't have the society. Even if you wanted that to happen, we don't have the society to do that anymore. We don't have the mechanisms in place. Red Pill Addict says, almost a year of monk mode, and I must say it's very peaceful. That's nice. Good job. Dan W58 says, the evidence is not there. Was the argument against seatbelts, then it was the argument against tobacco smoking. Now it's the argument against enviroscience. Read Scientific American. Yeah, well, I mean, my issue or my counter argument to that is, I'm not talking about those things. And I'm making some pretty specific points too. I guess you can say that I'm skeptical about claims made about the environment, but then again, I think you're trying to label everything that you agree with as not being environmentally skeptical. But you can come up with a claim that just makes no sense or that's false on its face about the environment, and then I could say, well, if you don't believe that, you're an enviroskeptic. I mean, it doesn't make... Seatbelts are not the same as global warming. I agree that you have to analyze things individually and see... whether the idea that there's not enough evidence is valid in a particular case, but there are clearly cases where there's not enough evidence, and that's my take on it. I just don't see it. I don't believe that you can say that we're not causing climate change, but to stake so much policy over the environment on this idea that you have to believe in climate change or you're part of the problem, I just don't think that's conclusive. And the fact that that's sort of that's basically the argument that's made, rather than just saying, look at the data, look at this. We know because for the last 200 years the temperature has gone up every year. Now, I'm not saying that's what would be necessary to make a convincing argument. That's just an example of a case that would be convincing, clearly, but I just don't see it. And when you also have things like, in the early 2000s, let me give you another example of why I just don't buy it. In the early 2000s, from what I remember reading, there was this sort of lull with the global warming where it looked like things had actually evened out, and so the temperature was actually coming down or staying the same. And, at that point, everybody kind of got quiet about global warming, on the left especially. Because the evidence started to look different. And so ultimately you had this sort of argument, well, this really isn't happening then. This climate change is just a myth. We know it's a myth because it's leveled off, which is not even the argument that I'm making here. And then starting in the later 2000s, the numbers started to go up again. The temperature data started to increase again. What happened was a lot of this data was being collected by two different means, right? It was being collected on the ocean, I think, from buoys that had temperature sensors and from boats, ships that had some sort of thermostats, right? They were not thermostats, but thermometers. They were basically super precise scientific tools. Scientific thermometers. I need to get a drink. My mouth is getting way too dry. Sorry. And what happened was there was a difference, systemically, a difference between the temperatures that were being gathered, the data that was being gathered by either the buoys or, between the buoys and the ships, right? For whatever reason, I don't know which one was higher. I don't remember which one was gathering the higher data versus the lower temperature data, the lower temperatures. But what they did was they took whichever one was getting the higher temperature readings and they did away with the other and just said, well, we're just going to collect data based on this now. Of course, all of a sudden, the temperature data starts to increase again. Oh, climate change is back and it's worse than ever, right? That was the sort of what you would think if you were just looking at the chart of the temperature data overall. And so it's clear to me, based on that kind of thing, that they're manipulating the data. It's clear to me that it's questionable whether these scientists are really unbiased and whether they're doing their experiment by using the scientific method or whether they're just ideological, right? They just want the result that they want, and they want to support global warming because they generally have a pro-government view on things. And you can see this with other stuff too, where, you know, the scientific community will say things that are left-leaning, right? That they clearly are not just based on the scientific method in itself, but are based on what they want the scientific community to basically say. To a large extent, in my opinion, they've been co-opted by the left, by the political movements on the left. And so that's the problem that I have with this, is that there is more chicanery and more, you know, political motivation than there is where is the data, right? How do we know 100 years ago what the precise temperature was when we didn't have the same kind of devices? And we're talking about a very small overall increase in temperature over a fairly short period of time, right? Not that many data points. In my opinion, that's insufficient. So I'm not, I hope that I'm trying to basically show you, I'm not coming at this from, I just assume that the conservative position on climate change is right and that it's all fake. I just am not convinced based on the information. Now, if you want to talk about something like seatbelts, with seatbelts, maybe it would be very difficult to collect data if you didn't have enough vehicles that had seatbelts to begin with, or you couldn't just kill people. You know, you have the crash dummies and stuff. I don't know when that came into effect, when they started experimenting with that. But if the amount of force, or, you know, the amount of like people getting ejected from their vehicles was clearly there, I would look at that and say seatbelts work. At least I hope that I would. Same with tobacco. It's like if the people that are smoking cigarettes are clearly getting lung cancer way more often, you know, which they are, than people that don't smoke cigarettes, I'm going to say there's a causal link there. If the evidence is strong, if it's like 5 times the amount of people get lung cancer, or, you know, 3 times, whatever, I'm going to say there's almost certainly a causal link. So I am making the attempt to actually look at things objectively. I'm not just picking the skeptic position for its own sake. I just don't think the evidence is that strong, just because, well, the flows of the ocean are this way, or, you know, there could be a million alternative theories, well, probably not a million, probably 2 or 3, of why the ice caps are shrinking. But yeah, the water temperature here is getting warmer, and that's melting the ice. That's not, to me, enough to say that there's this disaster that we're heading into necessarily. Could that be the case? Yes. And then the next question is, what can we do about it? But for me personally, when it comes to the environment, and this, I'm really getting probably way too much into this than anybody intended. My view is, where human beings are destroying the environment anyway. Like, it sucks, but with almost 8 billion people, I just don't think that, you know, it's sustainable regardless of what particular things are happening. Like, you know, something's going to give with the environment because of all the plastics, the deforestation, all the other stuff that we're doing. It's just like, why is climate change the biggest concern with all these other obviously negative things? And to me, it's because that's what's convenient for the puppet masters. That's what's convenient for the elites. They want to use climate change to justify bigger government, and they think they can do a better job with that than they can with something like, oh, we need to stop using so many plastics that can't be recycled, right? They're not going to be able to turn that into totalitarianism, but they can take up take control of industry by saying that, well, industry is causing this climate change, or, you know, cars and stuff like that, so we're going to take control of transportation. I mean, you can take up bigger sectors of the economy with what they're doing. So I understand it from that perspective. I think it's just a matter of the elites will use whatever they can, whether it's a virus or a mass shooting or something like climate change, to try to gain more power for the government. I really think that that's the bigger thing that's going on here, in my humble opinion. Let me get back to the comments for how stupid some of the things I'm saying probably are. Let's see, some of this is also between commenters, trying to kind of decipher which ones are questions and stuff. Dan W says, I'm center right too. Exactly. Yeah, that's pretty much how I identify myself. No one really asks you, well, where are your political leanings? But, you know, to kind of describe it, I'm center right. I am pro small government, libertarian leaning basically, and anti-Marxist. If that hasn't been obvious, I don't support anything that says, well, you're the oppressor group, so we can take your rights away, and this oppressed group, they need special privileges and programs. That is toxic and will destroy any society. So that is what Marxism really pretty much, that's what it entails. So I feel strongly about that, obviously, but I don't get along with traditional conservatives very much. I don't get along with religious right conservatives. Even though I'm center right and I'm a Christian, I still don't get along with them because they are blinded by the idea of supporting Israel no matter what. That's one example. That's probably the biggest example of why I don't see eye to eye with them. But I could go on and on about that. It's really not that super important. But Max Live TV says the Democrats want $100 trillion for the Green New Deal, which is climate change. Insane. The Green New Deal is that's a pretty good example of what I'm talking about, right? It's more about government power and control and saying, well, we're doing this all for the sake of preventing climate change, more than it is actually evaluating what we realistically can do for the environment as a whole, including climate change if it's occurring, right? Reverend 20p says, oh, he's talking to the other Dan. He says he's probably a libertarian, though. Right. I agree with you, Rev. I think we're pretty close to being the same for whatever freaky reason when it comes to our politics. We kind of see what's going on with the SJW mentality. We're both libertarian leaning. We're not really conservative, but I think, and the fact is, I think we actually voted for the same people, because I voted for, I'm having a brain fart here. Former New Mexico governor ran for the Libertarian ticket in 2016. Crap. I can't believe I can't think of his name. Let me look it up real quick. My brain's starting to get to a point where it's fried, I think. Gary Johnson. I can't believe I had to look that up. It's such a simple name. I voted for him in 2016, but after it became clear that it was kind of Trump against the world, I voted for Trump in 2020. I think we basically are pretty similar in terms of the way that we see politics and stuff. Let's see. Let me try to catch up on the other comments here too. Red Pill Addict says, to me, do you believe that the internet was the start of downfall? I really believe that humanity was not ready for this technology. Well, I think it's complex. I mean, I'm not an expert on how the internet has affected culture and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of negative things that are easily accessible, and there's a lot of control that's available, but at the same time there's a lot of freedom. It's kind of paradoxical, right? So one good thing about the internet, for example, is that even though things may seem more chaotic in terms of people's belief systems and in terms of the information that's available, like an information overload type of thing going on, I think also that people are able to do more of their own analysis if they're willing to and if they're capable. In other words, people are not beholden to whatever Fox News /CNN /MSNBC and then all the other mainstream news networks that existed before them, ABC, NBC, CBS. They're not dependent solely on those sources, and in newspapers as well, for their information. And the bad part is that people can believe in things that are actually wacko theories, but they can also put two and two together and figure things out if they're willing and capable of doing that. So the legacy media is not lying to people anymore as successfully. I think that's why you see a lot of the reaction that you see from the mainstream media now and how they've become, in my opinion, this is my take on it, so rabid and so much against anything other than the far left mindset. It's because they know they're losing control over the narrative. Their control over the narrative, at the very least, has been weakened by the internet. People can look online and come up with other theories or other sort of assessments of the evidence when people are actually doing that, and they can kind of realize, well, this is bullshit, right? There have been some examples of where people have just gotten onto a website and verified that, or failed to verify something that they were presented with a mainstream news story, and then they looked it up themselves and they realized that it was all nonsense, or most of it was. I think there are good things that can happen from the internet, but you're right in the sense that it's so different from any technology that we had before it, and there is overload, and there are a lot of negative things. People really can, you can see the way people comment on articles and stuff on the internet. It really brings out some of the negative nature, the sinful nature, as we talked about. That's there too. So overall, has the internet been good or bad? I think it's complex. You could definitely make the case that it's been more bad than anything else, but there's some good things that come from it too. Dan W58 says, Dan, I was not advocating any policy. I'm not a Democrat. I'm just saying the environmental problem is real. Well, I agree in the overall sense that the way we're treating the environment is a major problem, but like I say, I'm not really convinced about the whole global warming definitive conclusive proof part of that, to be honest. I know, that makes me a conspiracy theorist according to some people. I'm not saying you, but I'm used to that anyway. All of my views are politically incorrect and outside the Overton window, so that's okay. Red Pill Addict also says, why don't the SJWs attack porn? There's nothing more destructive to women than porn. Yeah, that's probably... you could make a case for that. There are a lot of things that are destructive to women right now in the long run because they're being lied to and being told they can have it all. And then they can't. And then they can't just make men take responsibility for everything when they're not happy, right? When they don't have a family, when they're not in a stable relationship and so forth. So, yeah, it's all politically motivated, right? The SJW movement is just about using people who don't really realize what's going on, who are useful idiots, to affect political change. And so they're not going after porn because they don't want to. That's not part of their agenda, basically. So yeah, they don't care, but at the same time, a lot of feminists and whatnot will talk about how porn is actually good for women because they get paid more than men for doing the porn and stuff like that. And they do, because they're the center of attention usually. But that they'll say, we're using your sexuality in a way that, makes you the center of attention, or that makes you money, or that makes you successful, is empowering. So they'll actually say that too. It's pitiful, but again, all this is pretty much, in my view, being orchestrated for, concentrating more power in the hands of the people that already have wealth and power in this society. And so they're not going to go against porn if they don't think it's going to serve their purpose. Yeah, the Rev says, yep, it's interesting that porn is free and allowed on Twitter, but conservative views are not. Yep. I mean, again, that's because that's their goal. They don't want conservatives to be heard because that is not part of the overall movement, right? And it's not even a conspiracy theory. Like, I'm not saying that they're all getting together and deciding exactly what's allowed and not allowed, but they just know that, hey, we want political control. This doesn't go along with our ideology, so we're going to censor that. In my view. Dan W58 says, good to hear, to the Rev. I used to call myself a libertarian at one point. The problem is it's not much unlike anarchy. It would grow like bacteria but then be swallowed by a fish. Right, I agree with you. I think it's important not to be ideological in general. And that's something that I'd like to make a standalone video about someday. But, ideology in general is bad because it prohibits you from actually thinking about things and saying, well, wait a second, I support small government, but that can't mean open borders. We can't be so ideological. We can't be so much of a hardcore libertarian that makes sense somehow. In my opinion, that's an example. I'm sure there are other examples that you can come up with based on your own views, but I'm not ideological. I disagree with libertarians on certain things, or some libertarians, right? I disagree with the Libertarian Party on certain things. I'm not so much for small government that I think that the government doesn't have its purpose. For example, I don't believe in legalizing hardcore drugs because I think that would just make the drug problem worse, where a lot of libertarians would say, legalize all of it. That's probably not going to be helpful. But, if you're an ideological libertarian, you're probably more likely, or you are more likely to support that kind of idea too. So... Dan W58 says, Dan, information is a delicate thing. You can't see the evidence, but you are looking for it, really. A serious publication like Scientific American would, in fact, give you a more objective point of view. I don't... That relies on the scientific community in general not being co-opted by the state and by ideology. More than by the state, by the ideology on the left, more than anything. I've seen too many examples of just, we're going to basically shame you if you don't agree with the leftist view by saying that you're not for science. But then when it comes to things like trans issues, all of that seems to go away because it's not in the interest of the left to actually stick with looking at rigorous scientific studies and analysis. So I'm willing to read stuff, and again, I'm not really saying that global warming isn't happening or that we know it's not, but I really just, I'm not convinced by that. I think it's more political than anything else, and that it's being overblown in that sense. Not in the sense that the environment isn't in jeopardy, but in the sense of global warming in particular being such a unique threat. And especially when we're not doing anything to China, and they're the biggest, I think they're the biggest producer of CO2. I know they're one of the biggest polluters in general. But, yeah, that's kind of a side argument in the sense that you could still sort of help put less CO2 in the air by basically limiting ourselves in the West, but I don't think that's really going to resolve anything, and I'm just not convinced that that makes sense. Dan also says, Dan, I disagree again. 8 billion people is sustainable with proper efficiency. We could live off solar power easily. We could stop the disaster that meat eating is, but we don't. Well, that could be true. I don't know, and I'm not sure really how to ascertain and determine what the natural capacity, if there is such a thing, for human population on the planet is. A lot of it depends on what kind of technology we're using, right? If we're using solar technology and we have all these sort of, frankly, GMOs, and I'm not really thrilled about the idea of GMOs, but if you have, the food to feed them with, and you're not going to have some sort of compromise within the food supply system, and, you basically have everything going well for you, and you're using the maximum level of technology possible, which there's no such thing as that either, because technology always advances, at least eventually. You can have sort of bumps in the road, but technology generally advances. Yeah, maybe we can do that. But I don't think that we're going to be able to do that quickly enough to compensate for our growing population in the world. And I feel like, given the technology that we have, which varies by region greatly, so even that is not clear really because of how much it varies from place to place. But I don't know what the overall population limit is, but I don't really think we're too far from a disaster when it comes to that. Maybe. But I don't know. I'm open to the idea that maybe we could have 20 billion people on the planet. That would be nice. But I kind of think that we're more likely headed towards something that's going to be cataclysmic. I just hope that our species survives. And at a civilization level, I really think we're headed towards something cataclysmic, but those are kind of two separate things. Dan also says I should change my name to Montreal Dan. Back when I started my channel, there was a YouTuber making MGTOW videos called Toronto Guy. I think his channel may still be up, but he just does sort of like gaming streams now. And I couldn't really decide a name for my channel. And Ohio Dan's still not the best idea for a name, but that was ironically kind of the motivation. Like, if you can just call yourself Toronto Guy, just kind of put mention the general area you're from, maybe I should just say Ohio Dan, just leave it at that. So Montreal Dan should work too, I guess, using that same sort of reasoning. Rev says Gary Johnson. Yeah, I had to actually look that up, which is pitiful. But that's who I was trying to think of for who I voted for in 2016. That's right. Let's see. Red Pill Addict 36 says, Ohio Dan, the internet was bad for black people, especially black women. Why do you think it was worse for them? I'm not sure what the sort of difference is there. I'm not really, that aware and that keen of issues that affect black women, I won't lie. Dan W58 says, if your views are politically incorrect, kudos to you. The problem is when they are factually incorrect. 99% of people on the right are enviro skeptics because it's easy, but don't study it. Well, like I say, I remember in the 2016 election when that came up, you had a bunch of Republicans, conservatives supposedly, talking about how they're on the side of science and they believe it all too, and they're all on the global warming thing. Now, maybe that was because they were trying to appeal to more moderate voters. That's definitely possible. But I don't know that most conservatives really believe that. I think that that's the message that's put out there by the left and by the mainstream media a lot of the time, to be honest, just to kind of have another way of making conservatives look bad. But again, my sort of disagreement with that more than the point that I just made is that enviroskeptic of what? See, when you lump everything together and then say, well, if you don't agree with this, you're factually incorrect, I think that's kind of part of the problem, to be honest. There are things that I think are true and things that I don't believe are true about claims made on the environment. I think that the plastics that are continuing to gather in the ocean in the Pacific, where there's just this area, all these plastics have basically aggregated. That's a huge freaking problem. I think that kind of thing and recycling and whatnot is more of an immediate issue. But like I say, I kind of do know a little bit about data collection, and from what I've seen, it's just how far back with something like temperature data can you go and be precise enough to compare that with the temperature data that we collect now and actually say within a reasonable confidence interval, whether it's 90% or whatever, that we know that yes, this is for sure an association. Temperature is increasing over time, and it will continue to do so almost for sure. I don't see it, right? If each year is a data point, and you've only got an increase of temperature of maybe 2 or 3 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe it's a little bit more than that. And if you're in Montreal and you're in Canada, I know probably like 1.5 degrees Celsius. Maybe it's more than that that's being claimed. I'm not sure they always actually say that the data. I'm not sure they all present the same data in the first place, but I don't see that. When you have, maybe 50, 60, 80 good data points, and then you say, well, there's this small increase, I don't think that's sufficient. I look at that and then a lot of the other arguments that are made is just, like I say, circumstantial. Oh, we see the ice melting. And that doesn't add a whole lot to it, in my opinion. I'm not saying that's good, but I'm not saying that that's a perpetual pattern that we're heading into and it's all mostly man-made. I'm not convinced of that. It's possible. It's realistically possible. It's a plausible theory for what's going on, but I don't, or hypothesis really, but I'm not convinced completely that is completely valid, that that's been verified and that's conclusive. I'm not really there on that issue. Let's see. Dan also says, I love science, I love truth, I hate politics. And environmental skepticism is a political position, not a scientific position. Well, again, skepticism of what, though? Because to me, that could be skepticism of what the scientific community says based on political reasons is true or not true. And so they do go together, unfortunately, in some cases. Really, the scientific position would be we're skeptical about everything, and that's why we do experiments. It's why we hypothesize. It's why we have competing theories. So I don't know about that. Red Pill Addict, in reference to what he was saying before about black people, black women in the internet. I'm not a content creator yet, but yes, it is. I mean, there's so much proof. Let's start with rap music. Well, rap music existed before the internet, but yeah, I don't know enough about that to even form any sort of real opinion on that. Dan W58, Montreal Dan, says plastics are bad for fish that eat them, but on the other hand, they are a carbon sink. By no means the biggest problem, but they are far bigger problems. He also says global temperature is the wrong metric. If you try to heat up a jar of water with a big piece of ice, the temperature will stay constant until the ice melts, then starts rising. We are approaching that. Well, that could be what happens. That could be what we're approaching, but I'm not saying I know that that's not the case, because I don't, but that kind of gets into another criticism that I have with the global warming / climate change initiative, is that back in the early 2000s, I don't know when this kind of transition, but it used to just be global warming, and then it became climate change. Okay. Why did that occur? Well, that was the same time period, I think it was the early 2000s, when it seemed like the temperature data leveled off. So rather than just say, well, we might be wrong about this, they changed their data collection methods shortly thereafter, like I mentioned, in at least one case. But they also switched to using the term climate change. Well, that's problematic, right? That's an issue, because if you're going along with whatever is going to back up your claim, like, the data no longer backs up your claim, now you're going to change your concept. You're going to redefine things and call it climate change, even if that's actually what's happening, right? Even if that's, we really have human-made climate change based on carbon emissions. Well, just the fact that you're changing your concepts and your definitions that you're using based on what you want to try to prove, that's automatically a sign of not being genuine. Like, to be kind of polite about it, that's really, I would say it's bullshit to be not polite about it. Not saying that proves it's not happening, but yeah, I mean, this is kind of the issue that I have with this, is when you go down the path of saying that the most sort of perilous, damaging environmental concern that we have is automatically global warming / climate change, whichever seems to be more convenient at the time, depending on the context, the problem becomes you ignore other things. And to me, it's like, that's not really going to help the environment. Right? If it's all just about climate change, and you're not focusing on some of the immediate effects, like the plastics that I said, and I'm not saying that you're claiming that it's not an issue, but it's not all about climate change. There are real tangible things that I think are conclusively proven, and I don't believe that climate change is conclusively proven. Dan also says, yes, Dan, skepticism that leads to active research is positive, right? It is negative when it has a passive finality. I'm skeptical about that. Well, that's true if it's been conclusively proven, right? There are things that have been conclusively proven, like what you mentioned with tobacco and lung cancer, or cigarettes in particular, and lung cancer. But, yeah, I mean, sorry. I think I need another drink. Like I say, basically, if it's conclusive, if I'm convinced by the data, which in some cases I am, on various issues, and I'm not trying to pretend that I have no biases or that I'm always 100% objective. That would be pretty pretentious, but I try to actually consider the information, and I don't buy it. When it comes to global warming and climate change, I think that it could be happening, but it's not nearly the issue of what that the left primarily, which in my view basically controls the scientific community at this point, and what research is allowed and the results that they want to see from that research. Hence, oh, we don't like the temperature data collected by this method, so we're going to switch exclusively to the other method. I don't buy it. When that kind of stuff happens, like, I see it being compromised. I see it not really going through the rigorous scientific, somewhat rigorous, scientific process of, our measures need to be accurate, right? We have to measure what we're hypothesizing about. We have to actually collect the data in a way that's valid. We have to actually look at it from an unbiased point of view and say, well, this is what we think's happening. I mean, if you were doing that with what I mentioned in the early 2000s, you would have to say, we don't know what's going on because the data keeps shifting. We need to switch to one method of data collection, but we have to also acknowledge that that's compromised, right? If one sort of methodology is giving you higher temperatures than the other, we have to acknowledge that something about this was heavily flawed, and so we have to come out and say this and say, well, this is where we're going to start at now. Now, since that point, the temperature data has continued to increase, so that would be evidence that says that there could be continued global warming. But just doing that for a few years, and again, how far back can you go and actually get precise, reliable data? I'm just not convinced that there's enough data there. I think that a lot of it is circumstantial, and a lot of it is based on the left having too much of a say politically in what the scientific community does, right? And for evidence of that, you see these scientists coming out and saying, there's more than two genders and stuff like that. It's just stuff that makes no sense from a biological/scientific perspective. But still, the left and the scientific kind of establishment will go along with it, in my opinion, because they've been co-opted to at least some extent by the politics involved. Yeah, you probably have some conservatives. You have nut jobs. You have people that are being paid by corporations to say that, we know there's no global warming, just like you you had groups that basically said that tobacco is not going to cause cancer, that were paid for by those corporations. So, the scientific community can be compromised a lot, but, in either direction. But to me, like I say, I have some familiarity with it. I did have to go through some research methods classes and stuff like that for what I did, but it was social science, so it's not the same thing, but still, you have to be forthright and consistent with things like data collection. And for me, that's not what I see happening, right? If I can find that article, I may do a video on it someday if I figure out how I'd like to do responses to stuff like that. But the point is, I'm not saying, again, that it can't be happening. I'm not saying we can prove it's not happening, but I'm not convinced that it's conclusive when it comes to global warming and specific climate change, right? A lot of what I see is conjecture and circumstantial evidence, and you believe what we say or you're bad. And there's too much of that for me to think that it's conclusive, to be honest. Dan also says, well, global warming was right in caloric terms, but the skeptics then focused on degrees, not calories, to deny global warming. So climate change became a necessary clarification. Yeah, I'm really not buying that, to be honest. I appreciate your insight. I think that you know what you're talking about in general, but I think they changed because the data started showing stuff they didn't like. And also, I think that ultimately this is good in theory, but you actually still have to have evidence that the temperatures are increasing. So yes, the sort of measure stick or the relevant data is going to be the temperature. The rest of it that I can see is just kind of theoretical and based on assumptions. So, sorry, I mean, I just don't buy into that, because there's still, like I said, there's more politics behind it than there is actual, tangible, conclusive evidence for it. The Rev says, Dan, crack you open a Budweiser. I really should have brought some other drink out with me. I didn't really plan on going over 3 hours, though, in fairness to myself. Although I have enjoyed a lot of this back and forth conversation, because a lot of the time I do streams at night and there's not as much of a consistent audience. And Dan and the Rev are switching alcohol preferences and information. Well, guys, I think I'm pretty much worn out from going on and on about my views on climate change and whether men and women can be equal and the coronavirus stuff along with everything else. So I really do appreciate the conversation. I enjoy doing these things, doing these streams. So, like I say, just to give like a quick recap on some of the stuff that I talked about, although I don't know if someone's watched almost 3.5 hours of stuff, whether they really need the recap or not, but maybe they do. I really just think, guys, that with the coronavirus stuff, the situation that we have now is a strange one, where the whole argument that's been made up until this point for justifying this kind of, you have to wear a mask, you have to do, what we tell you to do, basically, has been, well, you need to protect other people, right? Other people have basically this risk of getting the virus and dying from it, even if you don't think you do. So you need to wear a mask, you need to social distance, you need to stay at home, all this stuff that we saw. But now these people have access to the vaccine. Everybody, virtually everybody with any realistic or even semi-realistic risk of getting the coronavirus and dying or having major complications has access to this vaccine. So who are you trying to protect? Who do you have to protect? Who's left to protect, right? And so my issue with it now is that these policies that say, well, if you haven't been vaccinated, you need to wear a mask. Why? Who are we protecting? The people that got the vaccine? The people who have also chosen not to get the vaccine? It doesn't make sense. And so to me, it's just clear that it's all about control at this point. It's clear to me that it's just about trying to punish people who don't do what the government and what our leaders, and the people that have a voice in the media are telling you to do. It's just about you do what we want, or we're going to tell you that you're bad, and we're going to do everything we can to try to convince you to get this vaccine, even if really we've reached a point where the people that want to get it have gotten it, and we should just be able to move on for the most part. Doesn't matter, because it's not really about protecting people, it's about control. That's the only, and again, like I've said earlier, if someone was making the argument that we need to protect other people, so therefore you need to follow these guidelines, I don't necessarily agree with that, but at least it's internally consistent. Now it makes no sense. There is no reasonable justification to the point where you can point out to just about anybody, why aren't you wearing a mask if you're not vaccinated? Because I have no one left to protect. You have the vaccine. So it's just about my personal well-being, and with my personal well-being, I choose not to wear a mask or get the vaccine, right? There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to make that choice now. The only thing left is the control aspect of it. And so to me, that's primarily what the coronavirus response has been about to begin with. But now it's not even internally consistent to try to come up with, a rationale. There is no rationale that justifies this whole, well, we're going to discriminate with people and tell you to wear a mask because you haven't gotten the vaccine. But if you have gotten the vaccine, you don't need to wear a mask. No. That makes no sense. If everybody else has the ability to protect themselves now, there's no reason for you to have to do that other than the policy is meant to control you in the first place. The second point that I was trying to make, or that I was talking about, is just this idea of equality between men and women, right? Even at a theoretical level, what would that look like realistically, right? And sort of, you can't say realistically and theoretical because they're almost in opposition to one another, but even in theory, what would that look like when you account for women's soft power? The fact that most women are not going to be held to the same standards as men when it comes to a lot of things, right? The fact that men have a lot of deference toward women so that, we're equal, but at the same time we're not. What would actual equality from like an egalitarian perspective really even look like? And I'm not sure that it's possible. That's the kind of conclusion that I'm moving toward, even though I'm not completely discounting the possibility of equality between men and women. I just don't know what it would look like. And so I have to think that it probably can't happen. I don't know in history that there's ever been an example of that. So I'm just not convinced by that. And then the last point that I talked about was, at what point does someone who basically adopts a toxic ideology, in this case primarily I'm talking about the SJWs on the left, but really it could apply to any sort of radical, in the sense of, we want to go out and create and advocate for a totalitarian state where you have your rights taken away as an individual. At what point does someone go from being just a useful idiot who just believes what CNN tells them about this to someone who actually has been immersed in this to the point where they're basically evil? They're not just someone that believes in something that they don't really understand. They have actually adopted an identity and a belief system that makes them not a very good person. That's something I continue to think about, and I've really not reached any conclusions about that, other than some of the things that were mentioned in the comment stream where, when you join an organization or take specific actions. But, at what point does a useful idiot become an evil useful idiot, basically? Rather than someone that still has a good heart and still has good intentions and has not been corrupted by that ideology, versus someone that has been corrupted and has basically become a tool of evil. Where is that line? So that's something I continue to think about. Thank you everyone for the chat. Let me read some of the last comments here. MGTOW, the Rev says, MGTOW Values is the only one you can count on at 1 a.m. Yeah, he's usually on pretty late. Dan also said, my point is that a real conspiracy promoting enviroskepticism, and a main part of there is a real conspiracy promoting enviroskepticism, and the main part of their pitch is that there is a conspiracy behind climate change, opposite of the truth. Yeah, and I think it's pretty much, I think it's part of what the government is doing to more or less justify taking over sectors of the economy. I do think that's really why they're interested in it. Doesn't mean it's not happening, or that I know it's not happening, but I think it's just being used like so many other crises, or how it doesn't matter whether it's a real crisis or a manufactured crisis. They'll use it to justify bigger government. I really think that's mostly what's going on here, to be honest. Rev says, appreciate it, Dan, and everyone in the comments. Thanks, Rev. I appreciate you being on the stream basically from the beginning. You've been watching me for like almost 4 hours now. You're probably going to be so sick of my crap that you're not going to want to watch my channel for a while. Red Pill Addict 36 says, cool stream, Dan. Thank you very much. Dan W58 says, I agree about the compulsiveness of mask wearing. If they had kept the policy to a strong recommendation, it would have worked a million times better psychosocially. Yeah, maybe so. I really think that that's ideally what you would get, is the government just telling you what's real and saying, hey, we recommend this for people especially that are at risk of getting very sick or dying from this virus, but we don't know whether this will help you or not. We don't know what the efficacy is. This might be a good idea, but you need to be prepared to protect yourself. The problem is, if the government was just honest like that, everybody would probably just freak out and riot. I mean, it would be worse than anything we've seen in terms of civil unrest, probably, if you actually told people they had to just deal with it because we didn't have a solution. So, instead, it's just, like I say, I think a lot of this is about control. It's about, the justification is something that has a real base to it, has a real substance to it, but then it's basically put in whatever direction that the government wants to put it into, to move it toward whatever their overall goal is. Red Pill Addict 36 also says, later, brothers. Thanks for your comments, Red Pill Addict. Appreciate it. And the Rev says, let's restart the discussion. I think we go another 3 hours. Man, this is the longest stream I've ever done. And like I say, I should have brought a couple drinks out. Or probably something more refreshing than just water. Like beer. Alright guys, I appreciate the stream. I appreciate the good conversation. And thanks for checking out the channel and basically taking part in the video. I really do enjoy having discussions and debates, even when I disagree with people on certain things, that have a desire to understand in general what's going on around them. And I try to at least be part of that. So thank you guys for commenting and checking in, and I'll see you guys on another video sometime, hopefully in the near future. Thank you.